Over. Hey guys, so war is on again, which I think everybody with a brain realized was going to happen. Like this peace was not going to hold up. In fact, I'm kind of amazed that it held up for as long as it did. But yeah, we're back at it. And as I said, I mean, the only way that this thing is going to end is it's going to end with the energy infrastructure in the region blown up, because that's the only way Israel will tolerate allowing Iran to retain control of the strait. But it's interesting because you're seeing all of these accounts now posting oh my God, how is it that Iran is able to make these precision targeted strikes? I thought that we were blowing the hell out of them. How are we? Still facing this much resistance and this much retaliation against us? You know, that's what I've been saying. I was even saying this back in 2025 when the first conflict started. You know, I was saying that that this war was not going to go the way that the Americans expected. And even I underestimated Iran at that time. Like, I didn't think that they could retaliate to this extent. I thought that if the U.S. invaded on foot, like, they would get really battered. But as we can see, it's far and away beyond what anybody expected. And it's been quite a joy. You know, apparently, I'm not going to be celebrating any kind of casualties of chuds in the armed forces because, you know, most of them are just there to get a paycheck, right? But at the same time, it's like you realize now that the Americans are facing real casualties from this thing. And that's what's going to end the war, is real casualties. But, you know, as time has gone on, I've kind of, like, it was exciting at first, but, and this is an issue that I've had, where, because I have some friends that are very passionate about this and very knowledgeable too, like more so than I am. And I'll listen to them when it comes to geopolitics. And I'll take what they say with very serious consideration because of how passionate they are about it. But even then, I just find it difficult to even care because I'm sort of thinking to myself, like, what investment do I have in this outcome? You know, it's kind of like how, and this was the issue that I had with Tails in my last stream, right, is because I'm getting very sick of the constant rape-fugee slop that we get hit with all the time now. And I'm saying, like, I don't understand why, like, this isn't even relevant to me. Like, why should I care what's happening to these people when this is exactly what they want? And, of course, the response to that is, how dare you, you're betraying the race, etc. Which, by the way, there is something that I wanted to say. I was just, my attention was captured by this Iran thing, because I've seen some pretty magnificent missile strikes, which I will be posting in a little bit. I have a few of them saved. So that was, like, the first thing on my mind. But one thing I did want to clarify is, whoever Tails, like, it was like a Tails aligned account. I don't know if it was actually Tails or if it was someone else. But it was somebody who was connected to him in some way, and I timed them out. I did a 24-hour timeout. I didn't ban anyone. So whoever this person was that was commenting on my last stream, they didn't get, like, a permanent ban. It was just a ban from that particular stream. So if you're there now, you can send as many messages as you want now, as long as you keep it respectful. But, actually, before I carried off on that little tangent, there is a few things I wanted to read here because I got a $10 super chat before my stream from Big Jeets, and he sent me $10 for a DEI award plus bandage funds. Thank you very much. You see, I cut myself on the job this week, and it was like $50 worth of bandages and ointments and shit, which turned out to be mostly unnecessary. But I was whinging about that, so I greatly appreciate that. And I think St. Vers, I'm not sure if I actually read the full thing out. I might have, that you sent last stream on the 12th of July. Wanted to give support plus access. Yeah, I think I did read this out. The Black Matriarchy by Sergeant Willa Pete. I'd actually forgotten to look into this book, so I was just reading through the super chats now to make sure I didn't miss anything, and I am going to actually look into that for sure. Anyways, let me just catch up on the live chat here. Whites have to ask themselves as they would rather die than see women's rights disappear. You see, Anton had asked me this before my stream on my Discord, and I had told him the answer to that already, which I suppose he wants me to repeat it. The answer to that is, you know what I'm going to say about that. Like, you already know the answer to this question. There's no need to ask me. If if whites were prioritizing their survival over their values, we would never have gotten into this position in the first place. So the one issue with whites is, and I've probably talked about this consistently in the past, I don't personally believe in the idea that whites are just this empathetic group, like suicidal empathy, as they say. Oh shit, I hope that, it's probably a bad word to say, but you know what I mean. Like, self-delete worthy empathy, or self-delete prone empathy. I don't actually believe that to be the case. I think for the most part, whites are more like a virtue signaling race, where it's not so much about being empathetic. Maybe whites are a little more empathetic than the average population if you compare the entire aggregate population, but I don't think that we're that much different. Like, we're substantially different. But really the difference is that whites are very universalistic. Whites are very prone to internalizing rules and then wanting to project those rules as a universal set of rules that apply to everybody equally. Like, that's the way that European psychology works. Whereas other groups of people, other races, other cultures, internalizing a double standard of some kind. The most obvious example would be traditional Jewish culture, where the whole thing is based on a very clearly and sharply defined double standard between the in-group, which is the Israelites, and the out-group, which is the Gentiles, right? And they have two different sets of standards that they apply, and every single rule, if you read the Talmud, every single rule applies differently to a Jew versus a non-Jew. And it's not always, though it usually is, to the advantage of the Jew. It's not always. Sometimes Jews will be punished more harshly for something compared to a Gentile, and usually it's to do with idolatry, because the Jewish religious requirements are more strict on Jews than on, as they call them, Noahites. So in that sense, you could actually argue that in some ways it applies more harshly to them. The point, though, is that there's a double standard there, and they have no problem with that. That's just something innate to most people. With Europeans are very universalistic. It really grates, I think, on European psychology to have a double standard when you have an espoused ideal or set of values, and in practice it's not followed. Which is why I think something like the civil rights movement in the United States was inevitable. It was inevitably going to happen, because even though you can understand the rationality behind it. You can understand the rationality behind segregation from the white point of view, just from the perspective of whites want to remain the dominant group in the South. It makes perfect sense why they would want that. I'm not making a moral judgment about that. As you know, I don't do moral judgments about culture, but from a philosophical point of view, it just wasn't going to hold. Inevitably, the ideals of America's liberal founding, all men are created equal. We need to apply the law equally to all men. There's no special set-asides. There's no special privileges. Inevitably, that was going to get extrapolated to the entire human race, right? And then eventually from that, it would then expand to women as well. And it is notable, and this is something that feminists will talk about quite a lot, is the right to vote was extended to black men before it was extended to women in the United States. And that is important, because the distinction between man and woman, I would say, is more civilizationally profound than the distinction between the races. It's more critical to clearly define the roles of men and women than it is to clearly define your race versus the outside race, I would say. But anyways, that's kind of a convoluted answer to that question, but because of the nature of whites, you're not going to see that. What you could see is that there might be, I don't know, there's no scientific way to prove this, but there might be a certain degree of admixture, after which point whatever genetic inclination there is towards this universalistic psychology is offset by the foreign admixture, and then you no longer have that. Perhaps you see that with Latin America, with the Latin American castizos and that are like what, like a quarter non-white or less, like it's like a quarter to an eighth non-white in their mixture, but they're majority white. It might be that there's some genetic predisposition there that builds up, but then at that point you have to ask, is that really a European culture? Genetically it might be European, but culturally it would then begin to resemble something non-European. It always takes Mercer 15 minutes to get ready because he has to juggle all his girlfriends and make up excuses to do a stream. That's partly true, but actually, I start my stream 15 minutes early just so that people know that it's starting, that it is going to happen at the designated time. And I do the 15 minutes with a little intro just so people can sign on and then be ready for when it actually does start. I think that's a little better than starting right on the dot from 0 to 100, and then people have to jump in and click the watch button or click the link. I think that'd be a little bit easier. At least that's how I would think about it. I don't think I'm doing I'm not Hispanic enough to do the Nick Fuentes thing where he waits 3 or 4 hours until he starts his stream. I don't really do that, right? Americans are too used to fighting rice farmers and goat herders. Kind of, yeah. I mean, well, the way that America's designed, it's they're in such a unique position, and this is a point I made on a previous stream. They're in such a unique geographic position. If you were to play any kind of video game, where it's like a grand strategy game, and you start in the American continent, the North American continent in particular. It is such an overpowered start zone. You basically can cruise and still win the entire game easily, just because of how strategic the location is. As long as you can control both coasts, you control the Atlantic and the Pacific coast, you are going to win, because it's such an incredibly advantageous position. So the Americans are able to project power everywhere else. And this is a conversation I had, actually. It's funny. This is all the way back during COVID, I think. It was before I made my first video ever, but it was I was talking with some Indians about how the difference between the continental European cultural tradition, like the continental Germanics, for example, like the Germans, the Prussians, even the French, versus the English and the Scandinavians. Because if you think about the English, they're an island, right? They don't have the same advantage that the United States does. They don't have the enormous resources and the strategic depth in the landmass. But they do have, they're not bordering any other country. So you have to cross a boat in order to attack them, right? And that also limits the amount of attackers that can be brought from one shore to the other, right? And what this allows for a culture that can treat its working class men in particular with far more indifference than a culture like continental Germany. Continental Germany, the German Empire, they always had these powerful states on their borders. They had the French on their borders, and the same goes for France as well, and also Russia, right? They all were bordering each other. They were all quite powerful states that could threaten and have invaded each other at various points in history. And so as a result, you needed to develop a culture where it would be possible for you to call on the manpower of the entire population, and the fighting age men would be willing to fight and die for you. In order to create a culture like that, you need to have, it cannot be hyper individualistic and elitist the same way that the Anglo culture evolved. And arguably the same thing happened in Scandinavia. I know Scandinavia is notorious for being very socialistic now and libtarded, but if you look at, for example, the Viking Age, right? Vikings, because Scandinavia, first of all, was not very attractive as a place to conquer and settle, because it's Scandinavia, it's cold and there's not much you can do with the land. But on top of that, it was in a strategic location that, again, it's a peninsula, so it's not exactly an island, but it's the peninsular connection to the rest of Europe is so far north that it's very strategically unfeasible to invade Scandinavia. And this allowed the Vikings, to just go all over the rest of Europe and invade and harass the rest of Europe pretty much with impunity. I mean, you could drive them out, like the English did. That was what created the Kingdom of England. Alfred the Great, the King of Wessex, he united the English, the Anglo-Saxon minor kingdoms, and fought the Great Heathen Army, as they were called. These were like the Danes, the Norwegians. They were the pagan Vikings that had invaded England and established a huge colony where they ruled, and their laws held sway, as they called it, and they called it the Dane Law. I think there was a movie about this. And King Alfred was, and the leader of the Great Heathen Army was named Guthrum, and King Alfred defeated him in battle and forced him back to his lands, and he converted to Christianity, and that was the start of the Kingdom of England. But other than that, like, you could drive them out, but it's not like you could go to Scandinavia and conquer them, right? Whereas, like, if you think about World War II, the Germans invaded Russia, they invaded France, they conquered France, but they invaded Russia, and then they were repulsed, and then eventually they were marched right up to Berlin. Russia was invaded by France and invaded by Germany, right at the gates of Moscow, right? And France, of course, was invaded by Germany. So it's a very different environment. You know, these countries have had to deal with invasions perpetually throughout their history. And so you could not have a culture emerge that was particularly individualistic, because this would reduce the attachment to the country itself, make them less willing to fight for it. So anyways, I didn't realize the Iran war started again. That's how many F's I don't care, since I deleted most of my socials except Discord. Yeah, I mean, me too. I like when I see shit happen that staggers the supremacists, I guess you could say. Like, it's not like I'm one of these third worldists who's like, yes, like, we need Russia and China to conquer the West or whatever. But I'm not of the persuasion. Like, I find the people that are like super obnoxious about how powerful America is, I find that to be very irritating, and I like seeing these people get proven wrong. You know, and also, I mean, just the way that America is set up, it really is like the prototypical economic zone. Like, America is the model that the rest of our countries are following. Like, the only reason why America is not more progressed, like, you see more progression of the economic zone model in Canada, the Anglosphere, and in Europe, is because there is like a powerful domestic opposition in America to it in some areas. But if you look at where these ideas originated, they were in the United States. And it couldn't really originate anywhere else, just because of the nature of the American system. So seeing them get their asses handed to them, at least in a few situations, is quite satisfying. Yeah, I will say that. Yo, sorry for me being silly last time. I'm one of Tails' YouTube allies. Have a nice stream. Look, as I said before, I'm not even really that opposed to Tails. Like, I would disagree with him about the state of a few things. Like, I would disagree with him about the nature of women. And I say women because I don't think white women are uniquely, as I've said before, I don't think white women are in any way uniquely bad in some way. Like, any other group of women, if they were put in the same position as white women, they would do the same thing. But I still think that he needs to look at the reality of what's happening, and the political relationship between white men and white women in Western countries. It's not as simple as these people like to make it out. And it becomes incredibly frustrating when they do overly simplify it. Like, one of the things I hate the most is where they say they're brainwashed into having so much empathy for these people, they treat them like children. That's not how they think. Like, no, that's not what it is. They see them as political allies. They don't see them as children. All right? It's not like like in some cases, it's middle-aged women that are doing the libtard thing, like that one woman the African that was masturbating in front of the children in a I think it was in Spain or Italy. And he got beaten up by the local men. And then the women stepped in and was like trying to help him out. She's not doing that because she thinks that he's a child or something. Like she knew what he did. She saw what he did. The reason why she's doing that is because she is more concerned about the implications of her men taking initiative like that and what they could do politically if they had the same initiative in other areas. That's what they're mostly concerned with. Like they're as concerned about their own men, or even more so, than about these foreign men. They might be more concerned about the foreign men when they become a certain percentage of the population, but that's really all it comes down to. Are you ever going to talk about the Inkwell incident now in Canada, now that it's out of the news cycle? Yeah, I mean, I tried to... I was actually going to read the manifesto that he did and critique it, because there was a few things where he kind of aligned with me. There's also many things that he sharply disagreed with me on. But I can't find a copy of the manifesto anywhere. It's just completely been wiped off the internet, which is unfortunate. And yeah, I was actually going to talk about it more because it has disappeared off the news cycle. It's kind of strange. It's, I guess it's like things are so strange in Canada right now that this sort of thing, like there's the degree of social consensus in Canada at this point now is so broken down that they can't even establish a narrative anymore about like a right and wrong situation. Like if the CBC is going to do an article on this and like the dangerous inkwell movement in Canada or something like that, it's like the majority of the people that are watching this CBC broadcast now, they're from cultures where women would have far fewer rights than what this particular young man wanted them to have. Like, they're probably not even understanding half of it because they don't even speak English. You know, it's kind of crazy. But I mean, is there anything else you can really say about it? He was sympathetic towards communism because he saw it as eliminating some of the economic inequalities that create inkwelldom, which is true. But and also but he was more like supportive of tanky communism. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of sympathetic towards the tankies as well. To some extent, there's some things that I sympathize with them on. Obviously, the main problem I have is that they have a worldview that is like it's fundamentally liberal. Like they reject the idea of human groups forming friend-enemy distinctions, right? Like they don't accept that. They fundamentally accept the liberal idea that humans start as individuals. And then they create their ideology from like the interests of the largest number of individuals versus the elite, you know, that sort of thing. I think if you start from faulty priors, even if there's a lot of things that you're sympathetic, like that I can be sympathetic to, you're not going to get anywhere ultimately because you don't have a correct understanding of reality. Anyways, he was something of a tanky. But I mean, what happened? He shot some people, and well, he shot one officer who was named Muhammad. May Allah rest his soul. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or whatever the term is. But brave French-Canadian officer. And then the unfortunate Jewish man was shot outside of Pornhub HQ. There's not really much else you can say. I mean, I think the female cop screwing that up was the most notable thing about that. You know. Oh, another thing about that guy, I think I've seen his somebody released a picture of his high school graduation photo. And I mean, he's not ugly, right? Which again is not surprising. Like the kind of guys who become like sensitive young men, autists that do this sort of thing, is not necessarily because of their looks. Like if you have a guy who is if you have a guy who's thinking about these sort of things, he's reading about these different political philosophies, he's systematizing everything, which is what I do as well. It's like, how do you even, like if you're somebody with that kind of psychology, how do you even interact with a woman in a normal environment? Like how, like what are you supposed to, like if this guy were to meet a girl who liked how he looked, let's just say, and then he sits down to have a conversation with her, what is he going to say? Is he going to talk about is he going to talk about the gender ratio? Is he going to talk about the disenfranchisement of men through capitalism? Like there's no way that you can connect with normies if you have this this psychology, and which I'm very sympathetic to. Again, it's kind of sad that I wasn't able to talk with this guy before he did what he did, because I think I could have pulled him over to a more, like a less wasteful approach, right? Because all he did was he ended his own life while he was still very young. There's nothing that he got out of that. He's gone now. You know, there's another guy who got shot and killed. Well, there's two people who got shot and killed. That were, like, he was going for the Pornhub HQ leadership or owners or something like that. You know, if he could have taken that guy out, I guess that would have been a political achievement, I suppose. But he didn't even accomplish that. He killed a cop, and then the female cop killed a Jew. So overall, we could say that in the aggregate, that incident was anti-Semitic because it resulted in the death of a Jewish person, a religious Jewish person. So we can credit him with being somewhat anti-Semitic in his outcome. But other than that, it's just such a waste. He also had he had a sense of superiority and megalomania, which you could tell. Like I didn't read the whole manifesto. I only read part of it. But I remember the first part. It was like, this should be translated into Chinese, Farsi, Arabic, and Russian. And I don't want to cause unrest in these societies, but this is very, like, he was thinking like he was going to spark a worldwide revolution or something. Like, I don't know if it's like borderline delusional. But unfortunately, there's a lot of guys. I think that the less contact you have, Actually, this is important because this is something that I wanted to talk a little bit about more broadly concerning Zoomers, men and women. The less socially integrated you are into society, the more deformed in either a positive or a negative way your sense of self becomes. Because in order to develop, like the way that you develop a sense of self, like a grounded sense of self that's based on reality, is your interaction with the rest of the world. And so when you have, for example, let's say a pre-modern society, there's no technology where there's communication. You're located in like a village or a town, let's say. Everybody's interacting with each other. You establish who you are and your value relative to the rest of the community based on how other people treat you. Like your sense of self is reflected off of their treatment of you, and that's how you establish who you are, right? Whereas if the society is sufficiently technologically progressed that you can avoid interacting with most people, you'll end up developing this distorted sense of who you are. Because there's no one to reflect back on you. So you could have like an extremely negative, self-loathing opinion of yourself that isn't actually rooted in reality, because people don't perceive you the same way that you perceive yourself. But I would say quite just as often, if not more often, it's people that develop this distorted, megalomaniacal, even like a messianic impression of themselves. And I have noticed that this is more common with Zoomers. I try to avoid picking on Zoomers because Zoomers do get shit on a lot. And there's a lot that Zoomers have to deal with that I don't think any generation before, including millennials, has had to deal with the environment Zoomers are in now. But like I remember I had a Zoomer working at the place I was working. He was like 21, 22. And actually he was pretty decent looking too. He was like... I'd say he's like a Chad Light in terms of his looks. He kind of looked like a somewhat more gracilized version of Cillian Murphy, and I remember I was talking to him, and he was like, "Oh, I want to become a streamer. I want to become like a video game streamer or something." And that's like his career path. I'm like, it's not impossible to achieve that, but like this is a very common thing I've noticed, because he's about the same age as my younger brother. My younger brother kind of had the same idea, and I'm like, yeah, but you realize how rare that is. Like it's both a combination of lottery, and you have to have a certain kind of talent. But they have no accurate sense of self, because there's no one. They don't interact with people to a sufficient degree that it reflects back on them. And I think this is also true with women. I would say that this kind of distortion may be somewhat less common with women, because well, okay, I would say with regards to how they relate to men, it is common. But when it comes to each other, because the women are more social with each other than men are, they probably have a better understanding of their realistic value compared to other women. The issue is with men, because it's pretty rare that they interact with men these days. But yeah, this particular guy, the shooter, that was his big problem. This megalomaniacal. Vikings also had a male surplus because the firstborn son got on all the inheritance. IRC. Yeah, it's called primogeniture. That was actually pretty common throughout Europe for Germanics. Well, actually, it was early on. It was known as Gavelkind, and they would split the inheritance between the sons. And this is how the Carolingian Empire split up into East Francia, West Francia, and Lotharingia. Is because it was split between Charlemagne's sons, and primogeniture preserved all the titles in the firstborn son, or the eldest son. And this would produce a lot of sons that were not inheriting. And what did that cause? Well, this caused a lot of, like, I would say it's hard to say whether the Vikings had a big boost from this in terms of their aggression or not, or if it was more so the Normans that came later on. Because the Normans engaged in a lot of conquest. They were in Italy, they were in the Holy Land, they were in Anatolia, obviously they were in France. They even campaigned in the Baltics. So, yeah, I think that was due to primogeniture. I think with the Vikings, it was mostly due to the Vikings preserved an ancient Indo-European tradition known as Koryos, which is where young men, you're not accepted into the tribe as an adult man until you can engage in banditry, basically, and you can capture a sufficient amount of loot from engaging in piracy or banditry. And that's basically what the Vikings did, is that they would go on their raiding expeditions, and then when they came back with enough loot, they would be accepted as basically a made man in the tribe, and they could then get married and have children, etc. That was a big impetus. It's kind of like with white boomers, how they kick their kids out at 18 and expect them to make it, something like that. Brit trash are too obsessed with being anti-white American to save their nation. Actually, I did see a few things from here. Let's play one. Hold on. I found some pretty funny Tommy Robinson quotes, or Tommy Robinson interviews, I should say. So let me load this up right now. Let's see here. Chromium. There we go. And gotta make sure that the volume is working. Hang on. Does it not allow you to interact with Let me see here. All right, so Oh, hang on.
So you could say it's ignorant.
There we go. Now I got it working.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, I'm at home. I've had there's a non-white lad who stayed in my daughter's room last night. Not with her friends. Like, I know him. You know what I mean?
No, but one thing I would say, and this is the conversation I've had when black people are like, they want black romance, or because I've spoken on the hypocrisy of the black
My mate
community.
said this. Yeah. So black and he goes, sorry,
Yeah, I've spoken on the hypocrisy of the black community, because a black man can come out and say, I want to have black grandkids, but if a white person would say it's racist. I don't believe in that, and I've never bought into that, because integration means that you can walk down the street and you should be able to make friends with or be able to talk, and someone of a different colour or creed should be able to exist without you bothering them or you treating them overtly any different to anyone else. But integration doesn't mean that a man of a different colour is allowed to shag your daughter. Do you know what I'm saying? That's not actually racism. Yes, you could say it's ignorant and bigotry, but if a man says, you know what, I'm black and I want to have black kids, or I'm Muslim and I want to have Muslim kids, that's just preference.
See, my mate said this. My mate, black guy, old guy, and he said, yeah, he goes, I'm going to name his son. He goes, he can't bring home a white girl. And I said, what? And I said, brother, if I said that, what would you say?
Oh, there's something so funny about this. What? Are you saying you wouldn't fuck my daughter? How dare you? We need to deport this man. He refuses to fuck our girls. We gotta deport him. This is the standard we need to have for assimilation into English society. Will they have sex with English women? If they refuse to have sex with English women, we gotta get rid of them. It's not permissible. This is the state of nationalism in the UK. This is and Steve Laws is I feel really bad for this branch, or this kind of ethno-nationalism that he has, because it's so hopeless. Like Steve Laws is even more like what I would consider sympathetic when it comes to the ethno-nationalists in Europe. Steve Laws is further than what even I would sympathize with, because he's like, everybody who has any kind of a foreign admixture needs to go. I'm just like, this seems very counterproductive, because there are a lot of people that are 100% English, a lot of women that are 100% English, that will be diametrically opposed to your politics, and there will be a lot of people who are either part English or maybe even not English at all genetically, but are actually sympathetic to English ethno-nationalism, as in England being supermajority English and identified with the ethnic English population. It seems stupid to draw a biological line where you keep a bunch of people who are hostile to your values and your interests on your side because of their DNA, and then exclude people who are sympathetic to you because of their DNA. When, you know, you can preserve the ethno-supermajoritarianism. You're like, we want England to be supermajority white British, but people that want to live in that society, kind of like the way I've characterized it, is it's kind of like how there's weebs that are so obsessed with Japan that they want to live in in Japan full of Japanese people. Like they would be actually upset if Japan had a mass migration of non-Japanese into the country where it would alter the demographics. Like those kind of people, I think that those people, the English version of them or other European countries' version of them, should be perfectly acceptable if you're a nationalist. Like as long as they're not actually affecting the demographics, like if it's not like 60% of the population, if it's like a couple percentage points, I don't see what the issue is. So that's sort of my position with regards to Steve Laws. But even then, like, he's in a really... Because this kind of thinking, like what Tommy Robinson is saying here, this is how most English right-wingers think. And I'm not even saying the women, though I'm sure the women are happy to agree with this thinking, but the men, they think this way. Anyways, I'm going to keep playing this. Hold on.
That's wrong. You should be able to say, I want my... No, but you should be able to say, I want my daughter to... I'm not saying that I want my daughter to be with a white boy, and there's absolutely nothing wrong in you saying that. No matter what anyone says, there's absolutely... Because if you were to say now, I want to have sex with a white woman, I'm attracted to white women, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Is the preference allowed, but the action... So like, what I mean is that if...
So my daughter bought him a black lad, yeah? Like she was last night, she's in love with him.
Yeah.
Well,
so you should be able to say that I want you to marry a white guy. You should be able to say that. However, I think the problem would be is if you don't allow her to do what she wants.
I want her to marry who she falls in love with.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
you mean it's not follow Islam?
So how do you separate Islam from the Muslim? Because I think what you're saying is that if they are Muslim and they're more westernized,
if they're not practicing,
they don't follow the religion by the book, and then you accept those ones. But if you follow the religion by the book, that's when you're a bit more.
For me, that's a problem.
This is what we're looking at now with the UK. It's pretty terrible. Nationalists don't see Tommy as a nationalist, and they never did. None of you... This is real life in the UK, though. Most of you noobs wouldn't know that because you're thousands of miles away and all thick as shit. No, dude, I have relatives, first-degree relatives in the UK. My grandmother was born in the UK and didn't get her citizenship here until she was like in her 50s. So I have first degree relatives there. They're all libtards. Like, and I also have friends in the UK from years ago, and they're millennials. They're all libtards. They're reposting libtard memes and like anti-racist memes and shit. Like the English population on the whole, and particularly the women, but also just in general, is largely leftists, and even the conservatives. Like if you actually analyze the positions of the conservatives in the UK or the right wingers in the UK in the aggregate, and we're talking like the politically. The percentage of right wingers that if you were to cast a net wide enough that they could actually win elections, they're very much like Tommy Robinson is still considered to the right of most of them in his politics. Like most of them are still doing the fiscal conservative thing, and maybe we need to get rid of the Boris wave, you know? Like it's the ethno-nationalism is not popular in the UK. I think there was a poll done where, excuse me, where they looked at English voters from like 18 to 29, I think it was, and what the English Parliament would look like, or British Parliament would look like if it was only 18 to 29 voters. And it was just overwhelmingly dominated by the Green Party. And yes, there are a lot of ethnics that are represented in the younger demographics, but we're still talking like majority white in terms of the voters, right? Like it's like 65-70% white in the 18 to 29 bracket or something along those lines. So they're still the majority, but they're quite left-wing, and including in the UK. Like if you guys remember, I'll see if I can find this actually. If you guys remember that poll that was done showing the divergence on political values between young men and young women over the course of like 20 years, and it showed women going really far left and men going either staying the same way or maybe going somewhat right wing. If you look at the UK in that, the UK is one of the only ones where both the men and the women shifted substantially left. Like English Zoomers, Anglo Zoomers, are substantially left-wing, more left-wing compared to like 15, 20 years ago. Whereas for Zoomers in the rest of the world, they're generally pretty much the same. There's very little difference. So the UK is pretty bad, man. Like it's pretty bad. I'm not saying this as if like I get any joy out of this. Like I'm actually quite saddened by it, but we have to accept the reality of the situation. I would actually say Germany probably has a better hope, substantially better hope than the UK does. You know, that's not even saying Germany has that great of a situation. They have their own major problems, but they don't have that kind of problem. That's why over 100 nations celebrate independence from England. Yeah, I mean, England is, I don't know, man. I mean, I think that's pretty based. I've always found it difficult to sympathize with people that whine about a superior power dominating an inferior group, or like a group that's weaker. Like nobody cries about the Romans. I mean, I think there was even a meme that was made by Monty Python where it's like, what have the Romans ever done for us? And it's like they introduced all of these civilizational advancements in the places that they conquered. I've never been able to sympathize with that, like sort of whiny, oh, woe is us, we were conquered by this overwhelming power. It's like, no, like the way to look at this is actually how the Chinese look at it. This is something that I particularly admire about the Chinese. They, like when they looked at what happened over the course of the 18th to 20th centuries, they called it the century of humiliation, and they were focused on like, how did our state, how did our society fail us where we could be dominated by these superior groups? And we need to learn from these people that are now on top in the world in order to reestablish China as the major world power. Like that's the psychology of the Chinese. So they were thinking, we need to learn from these people. We need to reform our society and our government, which they did. They overthrew the Qing dynasty. And we have to learn from this in order to recover our respect and our honor. Like, that's the way that the Chinese look at it. They don't do this sort of, woe is me, we're the victims. The Japanese are always mean to us. Like, fucking Koreans are notorious for this, right? They always whine about Japan. You know, like, the Japanese, they're so mean. They were doing the comfort women thing. Oh, woe is us, we're always oppressed. Like, dude, nobody's going to respect that. Like, the way to deal with being historically dominated is to become strong. And to oppose the, like, to be able to meet the former power with at least equal force and deterrence, right? Like, that's the way you should be thinking about it. The U.S. is finished, hated by everyone, and will be viewed as nothing but dog shit in the history books. Boo-hoo, nobody gets status just for being American. Well, unfortunately, America is going to be with us for a while. Like, as much as I enjoy seeing what's happening to the U.S. now, in the sense that they're finally getting, like, they can't just be arbitrary, right? Like, that's the reason why I'm satisfied with the war in Iran as it's progressing. It's not because I think America is going to fall, but that it is at least demonstrating a check on American power. It's kind of like the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in Germany with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire fought the Germans in Teutoburg Forest and lost quite decisively. And it shattered the illusion of invincibility that the Romans had at the time. That they could not be defeated by anybody. They could act arbitrarily. Like, they had this perception since they defeated Carthage, and then the Germans checked them on that. And there was another general called Germanicus, and he was named this for a reason. He went back into Germany and massacred the Germans in Teutoburg Forest in retribution for what happened to the Romans during that war. But they never were able to recover this sense of impetuousness that they had, right? Like, and this is what I'm satisfied with. The conclusion of the Iran war is not going to be the Americans' fall, because they're probably. I think the only way for America to fall the way that we are imagining it, they would have to, it would be like a total demographic collapse. Like, they would basically need to be Venezuela-fied demographically, and which could happen, as a matter of fact. That could happen. But other than that, like, they're going to be with us for the foreseeable future. There's no way that you can, like, there's no reason to assume that America is going to collapse in some way. Like, even if they lost the world reserve currency status, that would mean that they would have to discipline themselves in ways that they didn't have to before. They wouldn't be completely like dominant in everything. They wouldn't just be able to act with total impunity, but they would still be like, the American system would reestablish itself, at least on the American continent, pretty quickly, and they would still be a global power easily. It just wouldn't be the same as what it was before, but we're a long ways off. Again, the only way I could see this happening is it's kind of like what happened with the Roman Empire, where the Roman Empire transformed demographically due to the mass importation of slaves and migration of foreigners from the East into Italy, and it demographically transformed the population. And then there was a refusal to fight for the Roman Empire at a certain point for the local Italians. Like, that could be what does it, but it's not going to be any kind of external conflict. I don't see that ever happening. I wish, and I'm not happy to say that. I wish that there was something like that. You know, I wish that they could be dealt a blow like what happened in Russia when the Russians were defeated by the Japanese, and that basically triggered the chain of events that led to the fall of the Tsardom. Was the humiliating loss of the Russian Empire to the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War. There's no equivalent in America. You know, like, they're even more invulnerable than England is, because England still had, like, the bulk of English power projection was due to possessing a few very lucrative colonies like British India. But those were overseas colonies. They were still not located on the mainland. America still has the entire American mainland. They have this enormous domestic population. Even if the domestic population hates the government as it is now, they're still going to, I think this is something I mentioned in a video where if you even look at how the Americans view their system, it's not like the Americans, like right-wing Americans, for example, actually genuinely view the American system as fundamentally broken in some way, or like completely unrepresentative. Because as soon as their guy gets into power, they shift their attitudes towards the institutions in America. Right? They suddenly become supportive of the institutions. They still believe, even if they say, oh, this election was rigged, that election was rigged, they still fundamentally believe in democracy, because they will shift their attitude. And the left also shifts their attitude when they're in power versus when they're out of power, even if they're not totally satisfied with the governments that they have. So it's a system that can be balanced for a long time, is what I'm trying to say. All Europeans find English people far more likable than Americans, who are disgusting, obnoxious people. Look, I mean, I'm trying... Look, my ancestry is, to a large extent, well, at least half of it, is directly from the UK. So I'm trying not to shit on the English, okay? Because that is my ancestry. That is my heritage. But, look, come on, man. Come on. We have notorious stereotypes about English tourists all around Europe, right? We don't have those same stereotypes for American tourists. Like, they are notorious. The English tourists are notorious for certain reasons, right? I don't know what it is, but it's, well, particularly the English women. Like, they're known for just getting blackout drunk and being totally degenerate, which is why, again, I'm kind of like... I feel for the English, because they're, the English are in a similar situation to the Swedish and other Scandinavians, where the women are completely out of control. They can do whatever they want, and there's no way to check their behavior. You basically have to try and like beg them to not behave in a totally atrocious, scandalous way. Right? Yeah, the slags. Yeah, I mean, there was this one case I remember where this English girl got like blackout drunk in Cyprus, and I think she like did a gangbang with a bunch of Israeli Jews, and then the Jews were arrested but then released, and this became like a big thing on the far right because they're Jews, right? So the idea was, oh, the Jews, they're getting away with this because they're Jews. It's like, well, if you actually read the case, I mean, it's very much like there was no substances. Like she alleged that she was drugged, because that's what they all do. But then when you actually look into it, there was no substances discovered. It was just she got blackout drunk and she engaged in sex acts that she later regretted. And what a surprise, And at some point you could be like, so, like, our women are engaging in behavior that puts them at risk of being surprise snuggled. And, like, I suppose you could say, well, we should try and protect them from being taken advantage of when they put themselves in this position. But that's going to be difficult to convince guys that, like, maybe in principle, I could say, like, okay, yeah, we should probably kick these guys out if they are, like, there was some viral posts on X about these migrant men are hanging out outside of pubs waiting for like completely blind drunk women to stumble out of the bar so that they can pick them up and have their way with them. I'm like, okay, you could convince me to be like, okay, we should maybe we could use this as an excuse to deport them, that they're doing this, but I would not go out of my way to like try and defend these maidens' honor, okay? Because, like, why are you blind drunk stumbling around at midnight in the first place? Right? And I guarantee you most of them, if you ask them what their politics are about, like, they would be perfectly fine with these men being in the country in the first place. So it's not like these are English nationalist slags that are getting blind drunk, stumbling outside, and then they happen to see a nice brown man that they get into a vehicle with and drive off with. Like, that's not usually what happens, right? English people are not demonic in the way Americans are fundamentally. Well, the problem is, Barry, you could say that there is an English people, And we could, like, when you say an English man or an English woman, a certain picture comes to mind that, like, associations come to mind that we can point to immediately in our heads and be like, that's what an English person is. When it comes to an American, you're saying Americans are demonic. Wouldn't even say that there is a median American at this point. Like, they really don't exist as such anymore. Like, they've been undergoing this process of ethnic dissolving for probably over 100 years now, probably since the Civil War, because they brought in a bunch of continental Europeans to, and actually they were used basically as cannon fodder. Lincoln used the Irish and the German immigrants, the ones that were either fresh off the boat or just second gen, as cannon fodder to fight in the Civil War against the South. These people, after the war was won, of course, these people went on to, like, they continued to come in, right? And then, because they were known as the Ellis Islanders, right? So from the late 19th century up until, I think, 1924, there was pretty much open borders. Like, if you could get on a boat and get into America, you would be processed through as an immigrant, pretty much. And it created basically, like, it's kind of like what happened in Canada, where you had, like, these entire communities or sections of cities that were taken over by certain ethnic groups. Now, they were all Europeans at the time. So, I mean, you couldn't point to that and say they were, like, racially alien or whatever, but they were not, they were not American in any meaningful sense. Again, this is another thing. Devin Stack did a great stream on this, where he talked about the Ellis Islanders and how that was really the invention of the mafia. And the mob and organized crime in America really was a phenomenon that came with the arrival of the Ellis Islanders. They established them. And of course, the most important group when it comes to organized crime are the God's chosen people, of course, which is ironic because you don't hear about them when it comes to, when you hear the word mafia or organized crime, you think immediately of Italians, right? You think of the mafia. But actually, the Jewish mob was far more important. They were actually critical behind bootlegging during the Prohibition period. That was Jewish brains, basically, behind that. But since then, it's like, what even is an American? Like, do you... like Mayflower wasps and Southerners, I guess you could say. It's another funny thing that it reminded me, because if you look at African Americans, I think it's like 30% or like even I've seen studies as high as 40% of African American or foundational Black American, like slave descended Black Americans, their Y-DNA is European. And if you take that to its logical conclusion, there's probably a higher percentage of Black Americans that are directly descended from British aristocracy than white Americans, because most white Americans are not Mayflower wasps, right? So, and then we're just talking about white Americans here, right? So they've kind of, it's funny because there was a book called Slaughter of Cities written about this, where there was a deliberate attempt by the American establishment in the 50s, I believe it was. It was like the post-war period, the 50s and 60s, to migrate blacks into these ethnic neighborhoods in the North. So these Irish communities, Polish communities in these cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York. You migrate blacks in by, it'd be like a white person showing up to buy a property. And then when the actual family came to move in, and it was like a property in like a Polish neighborhood, let's say, or a Lithuanian neighborhood. And then when the family actually comes in, they were expecting them to be white, but they're Black. And then this would create problems, as you can imagine. And this would bring down property values, and this would trigger people to start selling their properties because they don't want to get hit with a massive devaluation of their property. And it was known as blockbusting, actually. And so they would actually wipe out entire neighborhoods using the northern migration of blacks from the South. And what this did is this broke up these ethnic neighborhoods and forced them into the suburbs. And this, because the suburbs were not like these ethnic communities, they ended up growing up with like a smattering of different ethnics all living together. The only thing they had in common was basically like their social class, which is middle class, and like where their parents worked maybe. And they became sort of assimilated white Americans, but it was like a very impoverished identity, right? Because it wasn't really based on anything other than their socioeconomic class. Like they just happened to be born and raised in the same suburbs, right? Actually, there's a, I'll see if I can find this. Hold on. So there was a Aphex Twin. There was an Aphex Twin music video called "Everything You Do Is a Balloon," and it had this like bike safety video from the 1960s, I think. Let me see here. Here we are. This here. And you can actually see this is sort of during the process of blockbusting.
No way.
H36.
And it had a let me see here. It had a fat kid. So here you can kind of see. You see the fat kid that's riding on the front of the front handlebars? That was actually, the kid's name is Stanislav. Stanislav. And what's interesting about that is that's exactly the kind of population that was being pushed into the suburbs at that time. Because I think this was, 1963. So this Stanislav kid was born in the 50s. He probably was pushed out of a Polish neighborhood in Chicago or something into a suburb where he grew up with all these other kids that were anything from like an Anglo or whatever else. And as a result, and actually what's funny is I kind of experienced something similar because I remember when I was growing up and I was in grade school, most of the kids I was in school with were white. But I didn't realize it at the time. But when I looked back years and years later at the school photos and looked at the names, it was like half the names were Slavic. And so they were actually like kids that were brought over or born in Canada, but they were born to immigrant parents from the former Soviet Union in the 90s after the Soviet Union collapsed, or from the Balkans, for example. But I didn't realize it because I couldn't really tell them apart from other white kids, right? It's kind of funny. Anyways, let's look at a few of the strikes from Iran, actually, before I get distracted from that. Let me see what we got here. Wait, this is the most recent one that happened. So this was a Kuwaiti power station.
يا لطيف محول الكهرباء يا لطيف محول الكهرباء اللي بس حريق.
So apparently this was in retaliation for a nuclear plant that got hit by the United States. So my prediction was that this war would end with all the energy infrastructure in the entire region destroyed. So Iran's energy infrastructure would be destroyed, and then they would reciprocally wipe out the Gulf states' energy infrastructure. And at that point, then the U.S. would just exit the war. And let Iran control the Gulf, but with all the infrastructure destroyed. And that's the only way that they can end the war. I had assumed that it would be Israel that would do this. Like they would be the ones that would provoke the infrastructure destruction. But it seems like the Americans are actually the ones that are going to be doing it, which is kind of amazing. And I guess it makes you realize the biggest problem I've had with analysis is I tend to assume that the people that are operating this thing are more rational and strategic than they actually are. And I think we're seeing now that they really are not. And hang on, there's a few other ones. There's actually some really good ones. So this one is interesting. Mario Naufal is he's fairly good when it comes to with posting, because he has not, like, the pro-Iran shills, like the ones that are just consistently 100% pro-Iran no matter what, they generally dislike him because he will report things from the other side that reflect badly on Iran in some way. And of course, the other side, like the pro-America and Israel shills, they do not like him for the opposite reason. So he sort of occupies, he has, to some degree, some credibility with me. So when he says this, 2 Iranian ballistic missiles reportedly struck in a second wave of attacks the Jordanian army did not initially acknowledge. This came after 3 reported interceptions over the Red Sea city of Aqaba, with the 4th falling in a remote area. So what's interesting about this is that most of the missiles that have been heading for Israel in this war, they've been intercepted over Jordan. They are not actually intercepted in Israel itself. So what could be happening here is that they are, again, it's kind of like that, if you guys remember the analogy that I made of the lich. It's like America is a lich and the phylactery is stored within Israel. And Iran realizes that if they can break open the protections to the phylactery and they can threaten that phylactery directly, that's how you harm the Americans. Because the Americans, first of all, even if you wanted to harm them, they're so far away and they're so protected geographically that you don't have access to them anyways. There's nothing you can do to hit them across the ocean. But because their leadership is dominated by Jews that control, and Jews that are obviously more loyal to Israel, that are only loyal to Israel, really, on the one hand, this creates a weakness because it means that they'll be willing to sacrifice anything, including the United States itself, to protect Israel. But then on the other hand, if you are able to threaten Israel directly and the Americans cannot counteract it in time, you can circumvent American national interests in order to protect Israel. And this is, remember, if right back when this whole thing started months ago, this is exactly what I was talking about. Like, they figured this out, that this is how you defeat the United States. You can force the United States into acting against its own national strategic interest by threatening Israel. And by the way, when this succeeds, because it will, you're going to see the Chinese and the Russians, but particularly the Chinese, because the Russians have their own strange relationship with Israel, but the Chinese in particular will be paying attention to this. And they'll realize that if you want to pressure the United States, you don't do it by threatening American interests, because the American leadership doesn't really care about American interests. You do it by threatening Israel and Israel's interests. If you can threaten Israel, you will then have the Americans, you will be able to influence the Americans and push them in the direction you want. That's how you do it. Are you guys still talking about the UK versus US? I'm not the one started denigrating the English, though. It was Slothmaster. He is vile. I like when Anglos say vile. That is one thing. Like I guess it would be like a lower class accent in the Midlands of England, where they say, "You're vile, you're vile." There's something I really like about that. There's something rather endearing about it. Especially when it's, because vile, to use vile up here would be seen as kind of a strange word to use. It's seen as a little more sophisticated than is typical for like common speech, especially in the lower classes. Whereas you hear it in the UK, it's like even the chavs will use it. You know, oh, you vile. You fucking vile, mate. Like that sort of thing. That's more Australian. But you know what I mean. Like they'll say it, and it seems endearing when you hear a word that's associated with sort of more sophisticated talk being used by somebody that's clearly not from that background. But English breakfast is fire. That slander shall not be tolerated. You mean like the sausage and beans that they eat with toast? I think it is. It's like beans, sausages, and toast, and eggs, I think. Those are pretty good, though I don't know if I would eat beans for breakfast. It seems like a kind of a strong flavor on the palate for breakfast. You know, for breakfast, typically I want like eggs and maybe some protein, some meat wrapped up in a wrap. And maybe I'll put a little bit of chipotle sauce on it just to give it some flavor. But usually don't want something that's very strong. You know, when I think of beans, I think of like a fairly strong flavor. And beans are also kind of like in the morning, you want something that'll digest really quickly. You don't want something that's going to sit in your stomach and digest because that's going to take away energy. Usually in the morning, the whole purpose is you want to juice your energy up. So that's why you drink coffee. That's why you eat something that's really easy to break down. Again, like eggs, like protein, eggs, sugars, that sort of thing. You don't want anything that takes a while to digest, right? Isn't there a legal merger of Israel and the U.S. military in the works? When the U.S. takes any kind of military, it's usually on the greatest ally's behalf. Only Tails were here to clear this up. I've heard something about that there was an attempt to do that, but apparently the Congress in the United States turned it down or something along those lines. I think it's irrelevant. I would actually say from the Israeli point of view, that would not be beneficial. The Israelis don't benefit from being directly bound to the American military. Like the benefit is that you can use the American military kind of like as a weapon against other groups, but then you can, whenever it's convenient, you can then remove yourself from their engagement. Because Israel is not in any position to engage in American wars like that are not directly related to their interests. So really, Israel only when I say directly related, I mean like, okay, so the conflict with the Palestinians and Hamas, that's directly threatening Israel. So that Israel being involved in that on a first-hand basis makes sense. Getting involved in Syria is what they're doing now, which their strategy in Syria right now, what they want to do is they want to establish a corridor across the southern border of Syria from Israel to Iraq in order to be able to move spies through Iraq, move military equipment and military assets through Iraq, because Syria is the main issue there, right? And what they do is, and this is why they wanted to have like an Al-Qaeda guy in control of Syria, is they can then say, oh, Syria is unsafe for minorities. We're going to establish a safe zone for the Druze minority of Syria. And we're going to establish it across the southern border of Syria and protect them with the IDF. And the Druze themselves would be supporting that, right? Because the Druze are also, like, they don't support the Muslim majority in Syria, right? They would prefer to be under Israel's control. So it's one of these things they do. It's sort of like how they play games with definitions for their state, because Israel is technically not an ethno-state in the sense that it's not a 100% Jewish state, but it's a supermajority Jewish state, and the Jewish state is designed to remain supermajority Jewish. And they could be like, and they play games with the definitions where it's like, yeah, but you could convert to Judaism, all right? You can go through the Orthodox conversion process, and you will be recognized as Jewish in Israel. That is true. But they know that realistically, the vast majority of people are never going to do that for the sole purpose of migrating to Israel. So they know that it is safe to allow that loophole in place, because then they can point to that and say, see, we're not an ethno-state. in theory, anybody could come to Israel if they were to follow this process of conversion and become an Orthodox Jew. And it's sort of the same thing that they're doing here in Syria with the corridor that they want to establish in southern Syria, where they're like, well, we want to protect the Druze community in Syria because we're concerned about the plight of minorities in the region. So we're going to establish, and of course, the whole purpose is military, right? But the problem is that Al-Shara, who again, I want to make a video on him. He's an interesting guy because, and I had a fairly strong disagreement with a friend of mine on Shara because he's from the region, well, not Iraq specifically, but he's sort of from the general region. And he was of the opinion that, like, these people, like a leopard cannot change their spots. If he's an Islamist, he's always going to be an Islamist. It doesn't matter if he pretends to be a libtard for public recognition or whatever. His goals are always going to be, like, some kind of radical Islamism. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I could see that, but, like, I think most of his followers are probably like that. But I think Shara himself, if you look at his history, he clearly cut a deal with the Americans because he was captured by the United States, put in Guantanamo Bay. I think it was like 2009 or something, or 2010. And then he was released, and he was allowed to go to Syria and fight as a jihadist against Assad in Syria. They clearly made a deal with him, and they wouldn't have done that if they thought that he was going to turn on them as some sort of Islamist radical. Like, it was very obvious, I think, that Shara was or he's also known as Jolani, the current ruler of Syria. I think they figured out that he was basically like a warlord. Like, he wasn't like a genuine religious radical. He just wanted to become a warlord. And they thought, well, we can work with this guy if he wins. I think that's what they were thinking. And they were right, because he is. But sort of complicates things for Israel, because he's not turning out, like, he just appointed, like, some Instagram thought to I think it's like the Syrian version of the Congress. I think it's called Majlis. I think I have this saved somewhere, actually. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see here. Shara appoints woman. Appoints actress. Because she's like an actress or something. Here we are. This is true. This is just me rambling at this point, but it's funny. Come on, here we are. President al-Shara appoints actress Rosina Lazkani to Legislative Council. In a recent presidential decree, President Ahmed al-Shara appointed Syrian actress Rosina Amir Lakhani to the People's Assembly. Lakhani, born in Hama in 1986, was selected as a member under the complementary third quota list, joining the nation's legislative body. Okay, she is pretty attractive, I'll give her that. So at least he's not doing the DEI thing where he picks like an ugly, disabled black woman or something. I guess probably she's like the most attractive woman in Syria. I don't know, but this is what I mean. Like, if he was a legit Islamist, he wouldn't be doing this, right? But anyways, like, that's what Israel's long-term strategy is. And the way that the American system works within, or the American-Israeli relationship works, is Israel will intervene directly when their interests are threatened, or like their population is threatened, or they have to establish some kind of direct control with a neighboring country, whether it's Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and everything else just gets handled by the United States. Like, that's the purpose of the American system. So I find it very dubious that they would formally create some kind of unified relationship between Israel and America, like militarily. I would find that highly dubious. And I would say it's very foolish as well. From the Israeli point of view, it's very foolish for them to do that. All right, guys, can we stop arguing about America versus England. I mean, look, both countries are fucked in their own ways, right? Both countries are fucked in their own ways. And hello, how is everyone? Oh, hey, Holy Rob, how you doing? Amina, so you think more countries will target Israel to manipulate America? Amina, uh-oh, it sounds like it could be a Foyd, or it could be Amin A. Might have to keep an eye on this one. But so you think more countries will target Israel to manipulate America? Yes, I do. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And the goal is to exhaust the major powers of resources so the Zionist energy emerges as a mini superpower or nerve center at the end. I think maybe some people think that that's... excuse me. I'm a little bit... I caught a cold last week and I'm still getting over it. So if you hear me coughing, that's what it is. But I think there's strategists in Israel that imagine that this is what they're going to do. The reality is Israel is way too tiny and within itself way too internally divided for that to ever be possible. Like, there have been people, I've had this argument with people on my Discord where they brought up, like, but Israel's moving intel over there. And I'm like, yes, okay, Israel will move American tech companies using their political influence and the influence of Jewish billionaires that can impose this using their financial clout within the company to do so. But if you actually look at the intellectual capital within Israel, like, yeah, they have an intelligent Ashkenazi population. That's true. But it's like, what? I think there's like 6 million Jews in total in Israel, and only 40% of them are Ashkenazi Jews, which is like 2.5 million or something. That's not... And if you consider, like, even if we assume that the Ashkenazi Jewish IQ in Israel is like 108, which I think is even kind of high, because you have to remember that the Ashkenazi population in Israel is not as elite in terms of their intellectual capacity as the Ashkenazi population in America. And then on top of that, they're also pretty heavily mixed because they brought in a lot of Russians and other Slavs from Eastern Europe during the Soviet collapse, or after the Soviet collapse. And those people are pretty much just ethnic Slavs. If they have any Jewish ancestry, it's very little. So in terms of the actual cognitive capacity that the Israelis have, per capita, it's probably decent, but it's like equivalent to a mid-sized city in the United States. It's like equivalent to maybe Texas or Houston or Dallas or something. You know, like, it's not in any way comparable to any kind of serious power, let alone a superpower. So it's pretty much no chance that they could achieve that. But there are Israelis that are delusional enough to do that, right? So anyways, let me just read this because I read something here. How the hell are... Mortis Machina. How the hell are Syrians the whitest Arabs? You know, I remember when I was in high school, there were Syrians that I encountered that went to... And for some reason, there was a lot of Muslim chicks in my school. And they would do the thing, and I'm sure Muslim, like second-gen Muslims from Muslim countries, Pakistanis, Arabs, etc., I'm sure you can sympathize with me here, because they would do this thing where they would have the hijab on, but then they would have like skinny jeans, these really tight skinny jeans, and these big asses just hanging out of these skinny jeans. And like, even back then, I didn't think much about it, but I mean, it occurred to me, like, doesn't this defeat the whole point of wearing a hijab? Isn't the whole point to avoid immodest thoughts being provoked from men? Like, but nowadays, of course, they call them hojabis, right? But they were also quite white as well, actually. Like, they were fair-skinned. I mean, they were obviously ethnic-looking in terms of their facial features, but some of them were quite pretty, and Lebanese as well. Actually, I think the cutest girl I'd seen was a Lebanese hijabi Foyd, who was like 5'2", and but like really nice shape, and she had a cute face. Like, she seemed like a really sweet girl, actually. Which is mainly the reason why I was attracted to her. Of course, I never talked to her because at the time, I'm like, okay, there's no way that I could interact with this girl in any way other than just through like strictly school related things, because she's wearing a hijab, which means, and at the time I knew like the Islamic controls between interacting with men and women are very strict. There's no way that I could interact with her in any other way that would be considered appropriate. But it actually was torture, because there were some really hot Levantine girls at my school, and it was you just knew you couldn't even talk to them. Not that I would even have success with them anyways, but I'm just saying, like, they weren't even an option because of the social norms. But anyways, so yeah, that's Al-Shara. So I think okay, so I know that this week is going to be a light week for me when it comes to work because of the weather. So I may just put out, like, there's a script that's about 80% done on a video on type 2 errors that I will be able to finish. But then there's another video I want to make concerning like high risk, high reward behavior in men under pressure. And Al-Shara is basically like the test case who I want to investigate, or like the ideal case, because he is an example exactly of like when you're in a hopeless scenario, socioeconomically, socially, culturally, and you're an intelligent man, and he's clearly a highly intelligent guy, and you know that there are other options available to you that are very high risk, that have a low chance of success and a high chance of getting your head blown off. But if you do succeed, the payoff is enormous. And he was one of those guys that took that risk, and that risk succeeded. And as things get worse, the number of guys, particularly intelligent guys, because there's a lot of young men, Zoomers, that are who have the intelligence, who have more importantly, the conscientiousness to go through with self-discipline to get a STEM degree, and then they get pushed out because of changes in technology, like AI. Well, these are also going to be, a certain percentage of these guys are going to have enough risk-taking tendencies or enough testosterone to take their innate talents, like their innate conscientiousness and intelligence, and then attempt a high-risk thing. And that could be anything from, like, they could maybe they could become part of a criminal network, maybe, or they could become part of a dissident, like, revolutionary movement. Who knows, right? Because Al-Shara, if you look at his history, he was a medical student. He was going to become a doctor before he joined Al-Qaeda, and then he decided to join Al-Qaeda. Right, so he had the cognitive ability to become a medical doctor, right? So he was clearly at least 115 in terms of his IQ. And then he eventually rose to the leadership of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and look at where he is now. So, yeah, there's a couple other videos I wanted to look at too. Don't really have much to say about them other than just watching them.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and they're all speaking English too. What a surprise, right? I would have put these together into another compilation, like the one I used as my background when the first Iran war started, or the most recent one started. But I didn't have time to do it. Maybe I will put one together if this continues and it doesn't slow down. There's evidence that the Americans will attempt to stop this again, because and they're being put in a situation where, like, the Americans can hit they can hit Iranian infrastructure. They can hit civilian targets. Yeah, they can attack the civilian population, but they can't degrade the military capacity of the country. Right? And it's sort of like what happened in Iraq, okay? Because after the Gulf War, Ba'athist Iraq got put under really severe sanctions by the Americans, to the point where it was causing like a huge percentage of babies to die from improper medical treatment due to the lack of resources. Like they couldn't even get medical supplies in the country. But Saddam's Iraq still limped along until the Americans invaded again in 2003. There's no proof of these sort of like attacking the civilian population either directly or indirectly through sanctions and trying to cripple the economy. This does not in any way seriously threaten the government itself. Right? But they don't have any other options. Like all they can do is they can hit civilian infrastructure, which I think is what they're attempting to do. Like they're trying to, like the Americans are hitting bridges, they're hitting power plants, they're hitting desalination plants, which again is really strange tactics, because the Iranians have already promised that when that happens, they're going to hit Gulf infrastructure in retaliation, and this will just make things so much worse. Like as I said, I know that the Israelis want to do this. The Americans should not want this. Like this is directly in opposition to American interests, American strategic interests, because this will trigger a global economic depression. Actually, let's play this one. Hang on. And again, it's interesting because, like, one of the things I predicted was when this war is concluded, the U.S. will be driven out of their military bases with the exception of Israel. And the evidence of this, that this was going to be the conclusion, is that the Israelis are building an American base within Israel. Like, you do not do that unless you're a conquered colony. And, like, obviously they do it in Europe, because Europe, they're just basically vassal states of America. Japan is a vassal state, South Korea is a vassal state, Taiwan. But Israel itself has never had U.S. bases on its soil until now. So the only reason they could be doing this is out of desperation for what the consequences will be. And yeah, there's allegedly going to be an invasion attempt, right? Actually, let me catch up on the posts here. Iron Dome is all overhyped fantasy. Well, Iron Dome was only supposed to protect against rockets from Hamas in Gaza, like very low tier, slow bottle rockets, effectively, and also like whatever Hezbollah was able to come up with. Like they were not designed to intercept like proper military grade missiles. So what you're actually looking at is David Sling. David Sling is what was designed for Iranian missiles. And David Sling, as well, is completely useless when it comes to this. Because when you're traveling at the speeds that Iranian missiles are traveling at, it's just physically impossible to intercept them. And what a lot of people will do is they will see the interceptor missiles blowing up in the sky without hitting anything, and they'll assume that means that they intercepted something, when in reality it's just they didn't, because it's pretty much impossible to intercept something once it's going past a certain speed. I forget exactly what it is. It's like Mach 5 or something. There's a certain speed that you just cannot intercept it. Doesn't matter how fast your missile is. It cannot react. Like it just doesn't have the physical capacity to react fast enough. And then even then, apparently the Iranians have developed technology where they can alter the trajectory of their missiles even after it's launched and it's on its way down. Hang on. So this is allegedly when 2 U.S. soldiers were hit and killed in Jordan. Let's take a look at this. Is this the same video? No, I don't think so. And yeah, they're alleging 2 soldiers. We don't know exactly how many. We know it's at least 2 soldiers. Again, the Americans are similar to the Israelis in this regard, where the civilian population cannot tolerate combat casualties. Like the Americans, because there's no real will to fight for America, because they're like Canada in that America's never faced an external invasion. I guess other than the British, I suppose, which, in like 1812, I think it was, there was an invasion of America by the British. But since then, they've never had any fear of an invasion. So, like, the American psychology is not built around that sort of thinking. And so when they have to, like, the Americans are perfectly fine with wars that might slaughter millions of people and devastate entire countries, so long as they're not taking substantial casualties. As soon as they start taking substantial casualties, that's when the situation changes for public support of the war. And that's exactly what's going to happen in America. And they have this thing here. This is another one that's quite funny. We're seeing some people cope about this.
Allahu Akbar.
So, this is something that does actually work on drones. Like using a railgun. Because drones are not fast moving like missiles. So you can actually take them down. Like the main issue that up until now that anti-air defense has had with drones is that it's too expensive to take them down with anti-aircraft missiles versus the amount that the drones themselves cost. So you can actually exhaust the supply of anti-air missiles just by using drones. But if you just use a mounted railgun and you just fire bullets at the drones, you can shoot them out of the sky because they're not designed really to withstand much, right? So the Americans have finally figured this out. But this is a conversation I've had with somebody who's very passionate about geopolitics, and particularly this war. The point that I've made, and this is also true in Russia as well. The drone warfare revolution, what it primarily has done is it has given an enormous advantage to the defending party. Right? If you have to invade using your if you have to invade another country using your ground forces, okay, and the other side has drones, because they know that you are entering their territory, they can position themselves strategically to avoid detection, and then they can use drones to attack you, migrating into positions to capture territory. So this puts you into a very risky position if you're the attacking party. But for the attacking party, drones are relatively much more limited in terms of their effectiveness. Like the Americans have started deploying drones, and there was an example of an American, I think it was like an aquatic drone that was used to hit some target within Iranian waters, and the pro-American OSINT accounts were all clapping about this, like, oh, look at America's back. They look at how deeply they've penetrated Iranian positions. And I'm like, yeah, but what exactly do you get out of using an aquatic drone? Like you have bombs that can do far more damage than these drones can, and that can hit far faster than these drones can. The reason why Iranians are using drones is that they can hit your equipment moving into the area. All right. like, yeah, technically you could use these drones from a further distance than, for example, if you had to send warships directly into the strait. But if we're talking about bombing from the skies, I mean, you can just bomb directly overhead. Like what they've been doing up until now is they've been going up to the Iranian border with their ships, launching smart bombs that are guided missiles basically, and then leaving the airspace. They don't actually fly over Iranian airspace. So even though drones could be of some use, their uses are much more limited for the attacker versus the defender. And so this is primarily, it's kind of like the machine gun. Like the machine gun in World War I was overwhelmingly a defensive innovation. Like it made it much harder to capture territory. Like in theory, you could also use it offensively. Like you could kill people in offensives with it, but its primary advantage was defensive. Right. And let me see what else we got here. Oh, yeah, here's another one. Estonian Minister Ariolas said that Iran has 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz before Estonia gets involved. That's going to be scary shit. Oh, wait, let me read this. Who exactly is going to be fighting during this ground invasion? I'm not even sure American soldiers would do it. No, there's going to be no ground invasion. Like, if you're talking about a ground invasion of Iran, it's never going to happen. Because if it did happen, it would be catastrophic for the Americans. And it's not even a matter of who is more... And I was talking about this in Wolf Slumber's stream, which... if you check out Wolf Slumber's account, actually, let me see if I can find it. Let me see here. YouTube. Live. Because, yeah, I was in a stream with him. JC Chadsell posted my stream as well. Here we are. So this is the account. I'm posting it in the chat. So this guy right here, Wolf Slumbers. I did a stream with him, which should be on here. Yes, it's Wolf LS, Dark Pills with Mercer, I believe in Snow Puppy Heaven. Anyways, I was talking about this. It's not even whether the Americans are superior in terms of their training or in terms of their equipment or not. First of all, like, yeah, okay, if you're comparing Delta Force to the IRGC, maybe you could say Delta Force would be superior. But Delta Force is designed for specific strikes. Like, it's very surgical. In order to actually invade Iran, you would need a draft. You would need at least 1 million soldiers, probably 2 million soldiers, at least. So you'd be dealing with the standard American population at that point. And this brings you into Machiavelli. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, the worst thing you can do if you were a prince is rely on the military support of mercenary armies. Mercenary armies are notoriously weak when it comes to fighting wars because they have no reason to fight other than a paycheck. They're not going to make any personal sacrifices. They're not going to sacrifice their lives capturing land for a paycheck. All right, this is why nationalism is so critical. Well, the American population, if you look at how, and this is always something that baffled me about armed forces in America, it's almost like they ridicule and mock their own soldiers because it's like a big joke where they talk about Jody as this guy who goes around cucking all the deployed soldiers and like fucking their wives, and it's like a joke that they make army songs or whatever the term is. What's the shanty or something like that? Like it's the little sort of sing songs they do, whatever. And it's like a big joke for them. I'm like, why would anybody in their right minds, like if I'm an American and I know that this is going to be my fate to such an extent that it's normalized as something to be mocked about by the U.S. Army, why would I want to be in this position in any way? Like, why would I actually want to fight for this country? Like, you're not going to get anybody volunteering for this shit. Like, at best, you're going to be getting something that looks a lot like the Russian, the Russians fighting against the Germans in World War II, where they had like entire divisions of men that would be shooting or threatening to shoot the conscripts in the back if they attempted to run away. Like, that's the kind of morale that you would be dealing with in a proper invasion of Iran by America. It would be a total disaster. Like, there would be no way that they could fight this war. So I mean, the only thing that I could see remotely happening is if they could convince the Kurds to attempt to invade, but that would be a huge strategic risk, because this could risk involving Turkey on the side of Iran, not necessarily supporting Iran militarily, like they're allied with Iran, but they would be attacking the Kurds, because the main strategic policy position of Turkey is to prevent the creation of a Kurdish state. They would not allow a Kurdish state to be created. Doesn't matter whether it's in Iraq or whether it's in Iran. If an independent Kurdish state gets created, then this creates the incentive for all the Kurdish-dominated regions that are not independent to form separatist movements to join this new independent state. They will never allow that to happen. So there's no way that an invasion would happen. The only invasion that I've been seen seriously mentioned, and it's probably bluffing, but Iran has talked about puzzling or mulling over invading Kuwait and capturing American bases in Kuwait. I could see that happening, possibly. I would still say that's fairly unlikely, because that would be a huge escalation. That would be almost begging, or that would be like if the Americans did not respond with at least a targeted deployment to those bases to recapture them, that would be considered an enormous loss of face. So that would almost be daring them to stage a ground invasion, which I think they would be absolutely based for doing it. Like, Iran would be giga-based for doing it, but it would be irresponsible from their point of view. So I consider it highly unlikely. Import all the Kurds to Brazil and Japan. That's just what Brazil and Japan needs. Well, Japan already has them. Brazil needs more of them, for sure. I'm sure Kurds would... I mean, you guys were able to assimilate the Lebanese, right? So... Fuck, I hate this heat wave. My goddamn car is literally 110 degrees inside. You know what's funny? There's an upside to all the smoke that has been coming in from Canada into the United States, is that it actually brings down the temperature, because the smoke blocks the sunlight. And so, for example, up here, we've had a fairly substantial amount of smoke in the air. It was really bad last Tuesday. It's not so bad since then, but we've had a consistent amount of smoke in the air. And it's actually dropped the temperatures. It was like 9 degrees Celsius in the morning here today. I think 9 degrees to Fahrenheit is, let's see here, for Americans, that's 48 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is in the middle of summer. That's really cool. I don't think I've seen it quite that cool or that cold in any summer I can think of. And this is further north. Where I am now is further north than where I grew up. So it's kind of crazy. And it was like 19 degrees yesterday. It was actually almost a little bit chilly to be outside with a t-shirt on. Which, again, was very refreshing, because I do not like the heat. Like, if things could stay between 18 and 23 degrees Celsius year-round, I would be very happy with that. I don't like it hotter than 23, and I don't like it cooler than 18. If we could keep it in that range, that'd be perfect. Turkey is a geopolitical nothing. They're too cowardly to do anything but run their mouths. That is true, but that's because they're kind of golden handcuffed in a lot of ways. Because on the one side, they have they have their integration into NATO and access to military equipment and other advantages from NATO that they get. And then on the other hand, they have the relatively good relations with the Gulf states, particularly Qatar. So they potentially have a lot to lose geopolitically, and they've been trying to play this game where they play both sides. Like Erdogan's notorious for this, particularly like playing with Russia versus Europe. Like they'll play both sides. They'll be like, well, we need to get concessions on EU membership or something else like that. We'll suddenly see a bunch of migrants show up in Europe from Turkey, which, you know, we can't control that, you know. Like he does these sort of brinkmanship, fence straddling strategies. But a Kurdish, like the establishment of a Kurdish state in Iran would be sufficient to push them off the fence. Like that would be a direct threat, because that would be the one thing that could actually break up the country. Russia should nuke Estonia. I don't think that they'll have to worry about that for much longer. Like I've been seeing posts now from Baltic states like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, that apparently now they're getting hit with a bunch of migrants, right? Because Western Europe is all enshittified now, right? So now they're all migrating into Eastern Europe and Northeastern Europe. And they're starting to hit these Baltic states that used to be these sort of pristine ethno-states. And of course, the women are fine with that too, right? As well, they're fine with it until it seems like there's like a threshold that gets hit, and then eventually the women start waking up and they start realizing they need to support the right wing for their own interests. But by the time that's the case, it's like 40% of your population is foreign. Something like that. Like that's like the threshold at which that happens. So these Baltic states, they have a long way to go before they hit that point. And they're very libtarded as well. Like they're almost as bad as Scandinavian countries in terms of the attitudes of their women. It's very liberal, which again is a distinction. There needs to be a distinction made between openness when it comes to sexual behavior and actual sexual liberalism. So like a country like Brazil, because Brazil is being mentioned here, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit. A country like Brazil is not actually that liberal. It's not like a trad utopia by any stretch, but it's less liberal than Western European countries. Right. Like I was watching this Brazilian feminist, talk to this other feminist from somewhere else, and she was like, "Oh, in Brazil, you could be arrested for taking your top off, but in France or in Spain or in Germany, you can do that anywhere, or well, you can do that in the park, and it's considered perfectly acceptable." Like they're much more genuinely sexually liberal in Europe, whereas they are liberal in terms of how they portray sexuality, like in Latin American countries. And, you know, using Brazil as an example, like they'll allow women to demonstrate themselves, like in the carnival, or they'll be wearing bikinis on the beaches, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily translate into permissive sexual behavior in the same way that it does in Europe, right? And if you look at Scandinavia or these other countries, they're very sexually liberal. I would actually argue that they're less permissive in their social attitudes towards public displays. So like in a country like Sweden, it's considered awkward and socially unacceptable to like do public displays of affection. So like having like kissing your significant other in public is seen as like excessive for the social norms in Sweden. But if you look at like the attitudes towards women being extremely promiscuous, they're far more liberal in Sweden than in Brazil. So it's kind of a confusing thing, but the distinction really does need to be made there. It's one of those things that if you don't make that distinction, you will see things that don't make sense, that seem confusing. Like, for example, you'll see situations like in Iceland, you'll see like a an African guy move to Iceland, and then in like a couple of years you see 30 HIV/AIDS cases pop up because he's been screwing all of these Icelandic women raw and giving them AIDS. And you're like, how the hell does this even happen? Well, they're highly promiscuous and permissive in Iceland. So it's very easy for women to, like, even just for the novelty of being like the one black guy in Iceland, it's very easy to just hook up with random women who will just do it because they feel like it. In a lot of countries that are paradoxically more socially open, that would not be permissible. That would not be culturally permissible. And that's the big difference. Smoke blocking the sunlight will force the AI overlord to put citizens into a virtual reality in order to milk them like batteries. Yeah, I'm waiting for that. At least then I would have something to do, right? Like the biggest problem I have with Canada and other states kind of similar to Canada is that other than favoring their political allies and maybe punishing you if you step out of line, they just don't really give a shit about you. Like that's what I talked about in my stream yesterday, right? Like I always had the impression growing up that I basically did not matter. Obviously, not in like the sort of whiny sense of like, oh, no one cares about me. Like obviously my parents did. Like my mother and my father, as flawed as they were, they did genuinely care about me. So I actually was quite lucky in that regard. I had two parents that were genuinely wanted the best for me. But in terms of the society, it was very clear that I was irrelevant, right? I was purposely, like my category was purposely ignored for the favored categories. And it was very clear to me at a very early age that this country did not represent me in any way. Which, it kind of reminds me of, here, I'm going to find this, hold on. There's another post I saved on X here. I'll find it. Because it kind of reminds me of it. Let's see here. Let's see, bookmarks. England. There's this Pakistani guy who was interviewed, and he was like, England's already, or he was like, America, he's cheering for, it was during the World Cup, hang on, in UK, England, I thought I had this one saved. Let's see if I can find this here. World Cup. Here's World Cup. Where is he? Let me see. There's this Packy who was interviewed, and I think maybe I have it saved somewhere here. I really should prepare for this more. Here we are. I found it. Okay. So there's a video.
What would Gandhi say about you wearing that?
Hang on. Let me mute myself.
What would Gandhi say about you wearing that shirt?
I mean, I have a lot of feelings about colonialism. I'm actually Pakistani, so colonialism aside, it's nice to be wearing the England shirt. Even though I've lived in the US like almost half my life.
I'll never wear an America shirt.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. This shirt sucks.
Death to America.
Yeah, death to America. As the Iranians say.
Yeah, hell yeah. But not death to England?
No, because like England's already dead.
I mean, I kind of get this guy's way of thinking. Well, actually, in his case, I mean, the way that the British state is designed, obviously, he's considered one of the privileged classes in the UK, right? In my case, but the England that he is describing, he is correct. He's saying England is dead, but he's describing the England that would represent the actual English people and English men in particular. That England is dead, and that's the England that he has contempt for, right? And in my case, I kind of feel that way about Canada, but it's the active regime in Canada. Like I've always felt the same contempt for Canada. And it's funny because now I may be wrong about this. I'll only know when I actually get there and experience a different country for a significant period of time. So I'm not going to claim that this is going to definitely be the case for me. But I suspect that in my case, like migrating to a different country, I've had people say, "Oh, but you're going to feel homesick about Canada," and I'm like, "What would I possibly feel homesick about? Like, there's nothing about this country. Like, ever since I was born in this country, I've never felt anything attaching me to it. Like, I've always felt like this country didn't represent me in any way. It never felt like home. That's the word I'm looking for. I never felt like I was home here. I've always felt like I was just a participant in the economic zone. And of course, that's by design, right? Like Canada is state-driven multiculturalism, like state-imposed multiculturalism, defined by the government. We do not have an official culture. We are officially multicultural. And so I've always felt like, well, like this country, there's no association with this country and my ethnicity, even though my people have been here for over 300 years. Closer to 400 years than 300 years, actually. And we were basically the first settlers here, or among the first settlers here. I still feel no attachment to it because the country at this point has been completely alienated from me. And it has been since I can remember. I've never felt any kind of attachment to this nation. Like the only thing I could miss in any way would be maybe the environment, like the ecology, because I do like the ecology of Canada. I don't like the winters, but I like the environment. Like I like the greenery. I like the that you can go 100 kilometers, or not even. You can go like 50 kilometers in any direction, and you're going to hit forest. That's something that I really do love about Canada. I like the lagoons. I like the lakes everywhere, freshwater lakes all over the place. I take a lot of photos of scenery that I really love, but that's the only thing I could miss. There's nothing else I could think of that I would feel attached to. Like Tim Hortons? Well, actually, here's a fun fact. Did you know that Tim Hortons in Canada is actually owned by a Brazilian multinational? Tim Hortons is owned by the Brazilians. So, total macaco takeover. But, I mean, there's nothing distinctive that I could think of that I would feel like, oh man, I miss having this. It's like, well, what am I going to miss? Am I going to miss seeing Indians everywhere? I guess. Like, I'm going to miss seeing Indians in every single fast food place. Is that what I'm going to miss? Like, am I going to miss, like, drug addicts, like, in all the urban areas now? That just taking up space? Like, okay, there was a place that I had to work at. And actually, maybe I'll pull up a photo of this, actually. I hope it's not going to be doxable. I don't think it will be. I'm going to look at this photo before I post it, just to make sure there's nothing too doxable about it. But there was the place I'm working at right now is a rough part of town, and I've actually had fucking like these real meth head ladies of the night, shall we say, approaching me, sort of doing I'm not even joking, they were like, sucky $10, to paraphrase it. Like they were just like, I want to make $10, give me something to make $10 with, which, give me something to make, and it's obvious that these are basically just escorts, prostitutes. Not even escorts, they're like lot lizards. I'm like, am I gonna miss this part of Canada? Am I gonna miss this? I don't think so. Hang on, I'm gonna pull it up. Just a second here. Oh, did somebody send me a super chat? It says here, Dark Pills is Mercer, somebody supported you. Did I miss a super chat? Let me see here. Philip sent me a donation an hour ago. Oh, sorry, Philip. All right, let me just take a look here. Been reading Separation and its discontents a bit. Not NGL, the J's seem kind of based. I'd love it if my people showed a tenth of the cohesiveness and intra-group altruism. Sorry about that. I must have not seen that. See, I have a thing where I tend to look away from when I'm going on a monologue about something. I'll look away from the screen so I don't get distracted, and I lose my train of thought because I'm just not very good at staying focused. Like, I'm sure you guys have noticed, and in some ways it can be kind of a good thing, right? If, like, a lot of people like if you can ramble max and just sort of drift from one thing to the other, but sort of keep it a coherent, like you can sort of trace the line of thinking, even if it's not a straight line. But yeah, I often look away for extended periods of time just to sort of maintain my my chain of thought. And I'll just sort of stare at the wall or something. But yeah, no, it's actually incredible. They are definitely unique people. And this is, and also, I mean, I have to be honest, when I look at sociology books and I look at political philosophy books, because that's usually my preferential thing, there are a lot of Jews, like Bertrand de Juvenel, who wrote a book called On Power, where he talks about the nature of power, like how power manifests and also expands itself almost like a natural process through institutions and through governments, and like the relationship between differential power centers and how they interact with each other. Typically it's the top and the bottom versus the middle. Like he wrote the book on this, and I actually got him through a Keith Woods video. Keith Woods did a video on political power and referenced Bertrand de Juvenel. His mother is Jewish. And there's another guy, obviously somebody who I've referenced several times, and I think it's actually insane how relatively obscure he is, which is Emil Durkheim. And he founded sociology as a discipline, basically. Like he did systemic analyses of suicide, or fuck, I gotta be careful with the S word. He did a systemic analysis of self-deletion, and he created like a theory of psychosocial well-being in groups based on attachment to the group identity, how cohesive the group is. And like when I was talking about how I felt so alienated from Canada, it made me think of this, like this chapter was so important to me that I actually saved it. I copied it in a separate, like a Word document, and I saved it. And I'll paraphrase, but he effectively says, like, when the state or society, he uses the word society, but it's like the state, the nation. When the nation becomes so liberal in its relationship to the individual that it gives you permission to dispose of yourself. Like you have, like, you're not given any purpose to exist by the society, and you're just expected to exist as is. It becomes much easier for the individual to detach themselves from their own lives than if they are given a purpose to live by the society or the state. And as a matter of fact, he would use the Jewish community as an example, because he would bring up how Jews were way overrepresented in insanity and in like mental health issues. You know, some things never change, right? Because they were overrepresented by a significant degree in institutions. Like, when I say institutions, I mean like psychiatric institutions. But at the same time, they had a low suicide rate. I said it again. They had a low self-deletion rate compared to the Catholics, and also in particular the Protestants. And what he figured out was the Protestants had the highest rate of self-deletion, and Catholics had the intermediate rate, and Jews had the lowest rate in French and German society that he analyzed. And and he's Jewish. Durkheim is, I believe he's a Sephardic Jew. So I'm left sort of like, okay, on the one hand, these people are an enormous problem when you allow them into your country and they can infiltrate it and they can hijack the elite power centers. And they can act as a collective group in their own interest against your interest. Or effectively, wherever your interest conflicts with theirs, they overrule you and they impose their interests on you. That is a huge problem. But at the same time, like, I'm really not somebody who would want to, like, disappear them as a population. Like, I do think that they can create some really unique, valuable contributions if they are not permitted to cause the problems that they cause. So, like, this is kind of why I like, in theory, the idea of Israel as a state. It's like you give them their own state that they can exist in and they can do their thing. And, for example, actually, there was a book that was written called I think it was Nations, Their Deep Roots and something. And it was written by an Israeli academic called Azar Gat. And he went into the history of nationalism. And he proved that it was far more primordial than what modernists... Because if you talk to any leftists about the origin of nationalism, I mean, like, academic leftists. So I don't mean just your typical libtards or even your typical leftists, but like the ones that actually understand their own theories, like their side's theories about things. They'll say nationalism was invented in the 19th century as a way of advancing the interests of capitalism. Like it wasn't something that existed before the 19th century. And Azar Gat proves that no, this is actually far more primordial than that, and you can trace this. And he actually uses the Israelites as one of the primordial examples of nationalism. And this is an excellent contribution. And again, this was another example that Keith Woods cited. You know, Keith Woods is no like Ziocon or anything like that, or a normie con in any way, but he was citing Azar Gat. So, I mean, this is another example of a guy. I haven't read the book yet myself, but I would like to read it. But, they do contribute positively when they are not causing problems. That's really the bottom line I'm trying to say. But the problem is, how do we prevent them from doing what they do? You know? There was this Orthodox streamer who, I don't know if he still does content, but he used to actually dialogue a lot with nationalists that were anti-Jewish. And he would call them, and including Keith Woods. Again, I know him because I found him through Keith Woods. And he went by the moniker of Doovid. It was like Doovid. And he was of the impression, like, this is just kind of how they are by nature. They just sort of, it's almost like it comes naturally to them to try and worm their way into positions of power. It's almost like a neurotic thing where if they don't do that, they are, it's like they're driven by anxiety and fear about what could happen to them if they don't get into positions where they can protect themselves from the Gentiles, you know, by wielding the institutional authority against the Gentiles. Like, that's the sort of the psychology that he described it as. And he was of the opinion that it's almost like a congenital thing, at which point I'd be like, well, how do you deal with that? I don't know. But it would be nice if we could figure out a happy medium. Anyways, hang on just one sec. I'm just going to double check to make sure. Yeah, here we are. Take a look at this. Let's see here. So this is a photo I took of something that was written on a wall near the place where I was working. Jayla is an underage STD-ridden town bicycle. $10 BJs 50 times a day. F's married and attached men for goof tokes. Reward for rinsing, robbing, effing up that slut bag daily until she disappears. Bag chasing homewrecker. Die ho, karma attacks, X10. Death cremation, good luck hiding. So clearly this Jayla individual was, look, I mean, if I don't have any insight into the psychology of women. Really, well, I mean, I have a little bit, but like most of it is foreign to me. But if I was a woman, and let's say I was a married woman, and my husband cheated on me with a prostitute that was selling her acts, shall we say, for $10, I would actually be more offended at the husband for stooping to that level. Like, and I remember, like, when I first read this is sort of what I was thinking of. I was like, it would be kind of like if I was married to a woman and she cheated on me with like a 5'4" pudgy pod-bellied Indian McDonald's worker with like no chin and a fat face. Versus, if she had cheated on me with her boss, who's a millionaire, or like some other, where it's understandable, at least I would understand it. But it's almost like additionally insulting if it's somebody where it makes no sense. And this would be an example of that in reverse, at least in my mind. I would be more disgusted with the husband for stooping to that level. Like, I got approached by one of these types, shall we say, when I was working at this particular job site. And there's nothing, like, there is no, I can't understand why any man would want this. Because when I'm trying to be polite, right? When you look at these ladies, you're not looking at particularly attractive women, right? You're looking at, like, they look like they've been... Like, if you can think of, like, the nastiest, messiest street hoe that you can imagine, like, that's what they were looking like. At that point, then, I would actually wonder if there's something wrong with the guy. Like, what the hell is wrong with this guy that he would even stoop to that level? Like, that's what I would be thinking. Right? But, no, apparently... Apparently, my guess is that this was written by a woman who was married to a guy that Jayla did a trick for, I guess. I don't know. I mean, yeah. No, there's like zero dignity, and it's very sad. Actually, I will say this. Because I was working there for the whole day, basically. It was like a 7-hour day. And I was observing the women that were around this neighborhood as I was working on the roof. And for the most part, they were lot lizards, basically. And for ESL people, a lot lizard is a slang that's used for the kind of women that you will find at truck stops that will get into the what do you call that front part that the truckers, the long haul truckers stay in? Like, they'll get into that and they'll do their thing with the truckers there, but they'll do their tricks for like $10 and they'll look like a complete fucking mess. Like, they'll look like walking Petri dishes, right? That's what a lot lizard is. And I would say like 80% of the women that you would see doing their thing around here were lot lizards. But there was a couple of them. Like, there was this one girl I saw. She looked like she was in her early 20s or something. Like, she didn't look old. And she was like 5'9". She was tall. And she was blonde and white and thin. And actually, she looked fairly attractive. Like, she was obviously on something. But I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm almost offended or annoyed with this chick. Because imagine being born with that. Imagine being born with... You're tall, you're blonde, blue eyes, decent face. I mean, okay, she wasn't like a Stacy, but she had like I would say she had like a Becky, like mid-tier Becky face. Long legs. She had that, that thin, that sort of slender physique, but she also had curves too. Like, it wasn't like she didn't have any curves, but she had like a slender physique. I'm like, you're blessed with these physical gifts, and you end up on the street selling your ass for, well, I guess maybe she could charge $20 because she was certainly a much better offer than the other ladies in there. But it just occurred to me, like, I have to spend most of my day looking and interacting with these like 5'2" Jetas that look like frogs or that look like partially deflated balloons and are just these frumpy, disgusting, like, and this is what I interact with all the time. And then you realize there's an entire continent where there's 2 billion people that look like this. And roughly half of those 2 billion people are women. And, you know, I'm not somebody who believes in like the, there's some things I dislike when people say, well, there's a chance you could have been born this or this or this. Like, okay, you would have been born what you are no matter what. Like, I am somebody who believes that. But at the same time, you do have to look at like what you have as your inborn gifts versus what the most of the world has. And to just waste it like that, there's something almost offensive about that. You know, I was thinking like this chick, I don't know what, like, I don't know if she's addicted to something or whatever, but like she could have been like, there would be dudes that would be more than happy to trad wife max her and basically finance her entire life because she's like a tall, blonde, blue-eyed white woman. Young, tall, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, white. And okay to look at in the face. Not super pretty, but average looking. But she just fucks it up that way. And there's like the entire, like 95% of the planet is just, ugh. By, you know, comparison, it's just almost offensive to me. That's just what it occurred to me. I was almost annoyed at her. I was like, how dare you be born with these innate gifts and just fuck it up like that? Like, it'd be like seeing a homeless, and I have seen this a few times. I've seen a few homeless chads too. Like guys that will have like, they will be tall, really good facial features, full head of hair. And they're just like homeless wastrels bumming around or whatever. And you think, how just people just waste. This is one thing that particularly annoys me when I see people waste cards that they could play. You know, I could understand if you're like a subhuman, if you're like 5'6" and you're ugly, whatever. I could understand. Like, I remember reading this it's one of these posts way back in the early Inkwellosphere, and it was this guy on, I think it was on r/brain cells, and he did a post about how he relapsed back into heroin because basically he's just been alone his entire life, and he's one of us, right? He was ugly, short, something like that, and he became addicted to heroin, and there was like no hope for his future. And well, first of all, I felt a lot of empathy for him. That was the first time I ever felt any empathy for a drug addict, because I could at least understand what his motivation was. But at the same time, I could understand why, like, not even just empathize, I could sympathize with why he would want to be a drug addict. You know, like in that position, I get it. I would still obviously not advocate it. I wouldn't do it myself, or I would be a drug addict. But, you know, if there's no hope in life, like you have no hope for the future, and everything is literally, you know, pretty much objectively that the cards that you were dealt were shitty to begin with, and now after a certain age, everything just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, in every conceivable way. It's understandable why people get addicted to substances, but just doing it when you have these opportunities, when this girl's in her early 20s, attractive, or guys that are in that position, it's just, I mean, I guess some people would be like, well, it's good that they're taking themselves out of the competition or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I guess technically that's true, but at least for me, I don't think that way. I just find it really irritating when I see that sort of thing. If they wasted their cards, they weren't their cards to begin with. I guess so, yeah. I mean, I suppose there's like a genetic predisposition to addiction as well, right? Where, you know, some people are, like, this is a huge problem we have with Native Americans in Canada. Because unlike the United States, we do have a substantial Native population here in Canada. And they're concentrated in certain areas. I happen to be in an area where they're a significant minority. I think they're the largest minority here. And it's unfortunate because it's not even really their fault because it's a genetic thing. But they're a hunter-gatherer population. They got introduced to agricultural society without any adaptation to it. Whereas if you look at, for example, the Neolithic populations of Europe genetically progressing all the way into the modern, or like the historical period. So like the Iron Age, like the Greco-Roman period. If you look at the genetics of the population there, you see that schizophrenia, depression, predisposition to alcohol addiction, predisposition to gambling addiction, pretty much all these negative mental traits, except for autism, decline substantially over the course of the Neolithic because they're selected against. Because these people that are not capable of coping with this new form of, like, economic form of existence, agriculture, they just die off. Like, they kill themselves off. That never happened with Native Americans. And as a result, we have these hunter-gatherer populations that have all these elevated predispositions to addiction, to mental illness. And because we pretend that race isn't real or there's no differences between groups of people, populations, we just let them rot like this without doing anything to interfere. And you just see them, they're homeless everywhere pretty much. Like the median homeless person here, even though natives are maybe like 10% of the population here, the median homeless person is native up here. Looks benefit men far less than women, especially financially. You're right, Mark Hansen. You're right, but I wouldn't say that's like 100%. Like, it is true that it doesn't benefit men, like, because for women they can make a career purely on looks. You pretty much cannot do that as a man, but it can make you compensating or optimizing your other innate talents far more easy and effective, right? So it reminds me of this thing showing, I gotta look this up. There was a graph where it showed people with high academic proficiency but low sociability or social skills. And then it showed people with low social skills, low mathematical aptitude, and then high mathematical aptitude, high social skills. I think it was those three groups. It was high mathematical, high social skills. No, it was four groups. High mathematical, high social skills, high mathematical, low social skills, low mathematical, high social skills, and low mathematical, low social skills. And the low mathematical, high social skills group was actually almost as successful as the high mathematical, high social skills group. It was like they were like within 20% income. And the high mathematical, low social skill group was actually not, it was like maybe 10% higher than the low mathematical, low social skill group, which was, of course, the lowest. These were basically losers, right? And the high math, low social skills, they were maybe like 10-15% above them in terms of socioeconomic advancement. Like, your social skills matter far more nowadays in your economic advancement than even your other capabilities. And by social skills, obviously by social skills, what do I mean by that? I don't just mean neurotypicality, though neurotypicality is important. Obviously, your looks are doing most of your talking for you. You know, you can look good, but then if you're an autist, you can fuck it up, and you'll end up not benefiting nearly as much from your looks. But if you have the looks and you're even just average socially, it's an enormous advantage compared to not having the looks, being average socially, but having like academic aptitudes, right? Now, I've known cases of this happening in my personal life. Like, I've known cases of guys that were outgoing and they didn't have any academic credentials, but they were outgoing and engaging socially, and they had the looks for it. And they could get it. They got into a sales job, and they were making like $10,000 in commission a month. Well, I mean, it would fluctuate wildly, of course, because it's commission. But they would be making, like, if you were to aggregate their income, they would be making over $100,000 just if you're combining commission with their regular income. And it was because they had the social skills for it, and they also had the looks for it. Obviously, you have to be able to engage with people to get them to buy things, right? But that's a career path that's completely shut off to you if you are in any way introverted and you don't have the looks, right? So, yeah, exactly. How in the fuck was that data collected? I've referenced it a few times. I'm going to track it down because it has matched what I've seen in real life. Like, this is why I believe... this is another statistic I'm pulling out my ass, perhaps, because it's from a while ago. But I do remember that Asian Americans, I think when you control for credentials, like if you control for credentials on a per capita basis, Asian Americans earn a lot less than they should compared to white Americans when you control for their education levels. Their income is much lower than it should be. Even though on just an average level, per capita level, their income is somewhat higher than white Americans, they're like twice as likely to have an advanced degree. And we're talking mostly STEM, right? But even then, they only earn slightly more than white Americans. It's not like a huge difference. And probably a large percentage of that comes down to, like, they tend to be very introverted and they tend to not be very assertive. And so this impacts their career over the long haul, right? Worst thing Amerindians have to go through is lefties patting them on the back and reminding them their land is stolen and going to remain so. Well, I mean, I kind of, like I talked about it in my last stream, I think a large part of that is that they were just sort of culturally emasculated at a very early period, and they were never able to recover. Like, it's, the society they live in is always going to be dominated by the white man, unless it's dominated by some other group, but they lost, right? Like, and it's funny because you even see the same thing. It's not even like whites, right? Because with the Andaman Islands in the Indian Ocean, there's mass Indian migration now to those islands, whereas it was when it was under European control with the colonial period, the Europeans kept settlers off of those islands because they saw them as like anthropologically important because they were hunter-gatherer people. But now that the Indians control it, there's Indian migration into the Sentinel Islands, they're called, I believe, the North Sentinel Islands. And the indigenous people there, the Andaman Islanders, they're undergoing the same process where they're becoming beggars. Their fertility rate is actually extremely low. Their fertility rate is like the lowest. It's like below 1 child per woman. The men are just, they engage in begging, and the women engage in prostitution. Like, there's no will to like create an independent culture for them. They're just sort of disappearing as these migrants come in. And to me, this is like a psychological impact, I think, of having this group come in and just impose a new dominant culture on you, where you are, like, as the man, you are no longer controlling the environment that you're within, I think. Introverted and not assertive, it's not their personality or social skills, it's how society treats them. Asians aren't allowed to be sociable or assertive. There are consequences for those who try. And then Doomer says, why do you think Indians out-earn Asians in America? Well, Narrate, I have to disagree with you here. And it's actually excellent that Doomer said that right underneath you, because Indians are a good example of an exception to this. And that's because Indians are actually much more assertive or even aggressive compared to Asian Americans, East Asian Americans. And Indians don't have the same problem. Like, Indians get into management far more easily than East Asians do. And this is in spite of Indians being generally perceived more negatively than East Asians. East Asians have never had really a negative perception in America. Indians have had at best an ambivalent perception, and more recently a very negative perception by the population at large. And in spite of that, And as a matter of fact, it's funny because I believe Indian Americans are one of the groups. If you survey them, they self-report far more racist interactions than any other Asian group in America. And at the same time, they're also among the most economically aggressive. Like they're getting into management at a far higher rate than Asian Americans are. This is a personality element to it. There's probably a racial element to it as well, like a genetic predisposition. You can be an autistic woman and just marry a rich guy. An attractive man still has to make his own way unless he can turn those looks into a lucrative modeling career. That's true. That's true. Yeah, all the CEOs are Indians. Yes, sir. We are CEOs. We are doctor and CEOs. But no, that's a good counterfactual to Asian Americans. It's not all Asian Americans. It's just some of them. It's East Asian Americans, and I think that's a psychological thing. Anyways, I'm gonna play this video from because I'm gonna have to because it's a real video. It's been investigated. It's not fake, and we're gonna play it right now. It's these Americans of the transforming variety.
With Jay Lee here, he is having a breakdown.
Say! Just say the right pronoun!
What'd you say?
7351.
Get down on the ground right now.
No!
You're about to get sprayed.
No!
Get down on the ground right now.
Leave me alone!
I can come in there.
Leave me alone, please!
Okay, are you gonna calm down?
I'm getting my phone out. I have to
Okay,
film
I'm
this.
telling you. Are you gonna calm down?
I will calm down. I will calm.
Do you know what this is?
I
This
will
is
calm
OC
down
spray.
when you get the pepper spray out of my face.
Alpha 73.
Leave me alone.
I have
Just please.
pepper spray
Please.
at this individual
Just
right
stop
now.
pointing the pepper spray at me. I will calm down if you do that. Stop threatening me.
Yeah, lower your voice.
Leave me alone. Leave me alone.
Do you want to get tased?
I want you to leave me alone.
John.
You have been particularly abusing me.
If you come,
You did it.
if you come towards me
You
one more time,
follow me.
you are gonna.
And sent to abuse the administrators.
I gotta deal
Don't
with
you
this guy. I
remember?
gotta deal with this
Don't
guy.
you remember?
Jaylee,
He's a
focus on me, okay?
Oh no, it's 100% real. This is 100% real. It was confirmed. Kiwi Farms did a whole deep dive on this guy. They found his arrest record and everything. And it's funny because right before this came onto my feed on X, this guy, Pensel, who's one of the regulars on my server, he was talking with someone else, and he replied to someone talking about how, like, this is the system that they have. Like, the reason why they are, like, the British government behaves the way it does is that it doesn't want any, they cannot tolerate any kind of successful ethno-nationalism of Europeans or any other white group, because this could provoke Americans to start thinking the same way. And it's like right after he said that, it was in relation to, I think it was like the British doing another crackdown on nationalists or something like that. And it was like the reason why the American elites support the British doing this is because they don't want nationalism anywhere. Or no, it was in response to Nigel Farage talking about how he was offered money by Elon Musk to support mass deportations or something like that, remigration, and he was like, no, I didn't do that because whatever. But and I remember I replied to him with I downloaded this video and sent it to him and replied to him like, I don't think white America is going to be much of a problem in the future. Because let's be honest, you got a lot of these kind of people now. And it used to be, like, the way that people coped about these sort of freaks is that, oh, well, this is just a thing in, like, the left-wing urban centers, right? The based Midwest and the based South, like, we don't have anything like that here. But if you actually look at transgender identification and these other sort of things, it's actually trickled down very rapidly into the into the Midwest and the South, into like the, shall we say, like the working classes of American whites. It's not just like a phenomenon among the upper middle classes anymore. I don't think it ever really was. Because like the kind of, in order to have people like this, you need to, hang on, I just gotta watch this. I gotta watch this without the sound on. This is so fucking funny. Anyways, the kind of people that would be more likely to engage in this behavior, like they're typically going to come from family backgrounds where there was some kind of abuse or neglect or something like that. And it's not just like transgender identification, it's LGBTQ of any kind or any other leftist stuff. Like if you look at any of the leftist behaviors, like if you look at r/polyamory or anything, you know, all this other shit leftists engage in, polycules, whatever, overwhelmingly it's not like upper middle class white liberals. Overwhelmingly it's people in like the middle or lower classes that are getting involved in this, because they are, like, the reason why they're attracted to this kind of disordered behavior is because they have some sort of psychological trauma that just doesn't really exist in these upper middle class to upper class communities. And actually, this is one of the things I would argue, because there is a tendency on the right wing, when you look at like Jewish support of various culturally destructive phenomenon, like culturally destructive liberal phenomenon, whether it's the sexual revolution or it's diversity, immigration, these sort of things, that it's like a deliberate strategy, like it's almost like a group strategy to inflict this on the population. And to some extent, there's some truth to that, like they do view themselves as a minority and they view the whites as a majority that needs to be weakened. And that strengthening liberal protections for individualism is one of the ways that they can prevent the white majority from threatening Jewish populations. But I think another factor is that like Jewish groups are now heavily intermarried with whites, but prior to the 1980s, I think, which is when Jews started to mix with whites to a large extent, they pretty much were Jewish on both sides of their family, and they were like pretty much an middle to upper middle class population. Like there was pretty much no Jews in the lower classes. And so when Jewish intellectuals would promote things that were like the sexual revolution, that was extremely destructive. Like if you look at where most of the damage was done, it was not done in the upper classes. It was done in like the lower, middle to lower classes. That's where most of the out of wedlock births happened. That's where most of the family destruction that was extremely traumatic happened. Because if you're rich, you can divorce and it won't necessarily impact your lifestyle, because like both the man and the woman are wealthy, so they have the resources to mitigate the harm that comes from divorce. Whereas if you're like just breaking into the middle class, a divorce can send your family all the way back to the lower classes, right? It can destroy all of that progress. And also, I mean, if you think about the average IQs of, like, let's say that you're in a working class population that has like the median IQ is 95, let's say. Let's say that the mother and the father separate because the social norms that kept them together broke down. Well, the kind of men that the mother will end up bringing into her children's lives, there's a much higher possibility that her children, particularly girls, will get molested by this unrelated man that she brings in, than if they were like from a wealthy elite background, like 120 IQ, mother's a doctor, father's a banker, and they separate, and then the mother remarries another doctor, let's say. It's far less, it's not that it doesn't happen, but it's far less likely that you're going to get like severe pathologies in the upper class population. That's just the way it is. It's just like the effects of intelligence. And I think what happened with these Jews is that they supported these liberal policies that would allow for divorce and allow for sexual experimentation, but because they were isolated in their own Jewish community, and because the Jewish average IQ and their socioeconomic status is quite advanced, they didn't experience anywhere near the harmful impacts that the rest of the population experienced. And as a result, it's like they were completely blind to the consequences of this. And, it doesn't mean that they're not responsible for it. They still did it, and it was still a disaster for the entire American population. But I think the reason why they even conceived of this in the first place as something that could be done, like you could just destroy all of these institutions that kept families together and that kept the society stable, is because they were only interacting within their own very closed communities. And like their families were all Jewish. And they were also, they were communal and ethnocentric compared to whites. So from their perspective, it didn't have anywhere near the same impact. Whereas for whites, it's like it hit them like the plague. Like if you talk to any white boomers, pretty much every white boomer I've interacted with, without exception, is divorced. Every single one of them. And it doesn't matter what class either. Like all boomers pretty much got divorced from their first wives. Pretty much all of them. And it's like, what a shock. And if you look at statistics for anxiety about relationship stability and trust, I think people that have parents that were divorced are like 50% or 60% more likely to get divorced themselves. Or it's like a huge number. And they're also much less likely to have like a positive opinion of marriage. And I think actually, because you guys remember that there was a recent thing that came out showing that girls were, like the amount of girls that have a positive view of marriage or that want to get married, like girls in high school that see themselves getting married in the future, is at like an all-time low. And it's below boys for the first time, I think. I'll see if I can pull that up. Hold on. Let me see here. Percent high school girls want to get married versus boys. See if I can find this. I really don't like the X search engine. It's really kind of shitty. Is it here? No. Here, I'll ask Rock. Find me the chart showing the percentage of girls and boys in grade 12 who see themselves getting married in the future and how it's dropping particularly fast for girls. Let's see if Grok can help us out here. Let's see. While I'm waiting for Grok, I'll read some of this. DSA membership is mostly white. The blacks vote for moderate Democrats. Yeah, I could just... It's really funny. There was a meme that somebody made. It showed like a Zoomer saying, but we want free healthcare and free education. And then it shows like a bunch of black Tyrone, the Chad face? It's like the black Tyrone face saying, that shit already free, nigga. Because it is free for them. It's like, why would you care about that shit if you're black and, you get all the advantages from, what is it? I don't know the exact name of the entitlements, but it's like Medicare, Medicaid, and you also get education covered if you're below a certain income or something along those lines. Yeah, here it is. This is what I was looking for. Hold on. So, girls less likely than boys to want to get married. Let's see here. And this is interesting. So, let me see if I can find it. Here we are. So it's 83 to 61, right, since the 90s. And what I think this is actually capturing here, I don't think it's capturing oh, maybe there is a psychological shift with girls in particular, but I think what's more likely is that girls are much more likely to be like they're much more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Like girls are much more severely impacted psychologically by bad experiences than boys are. Like boys are just a lot more resilient. Boys can get over things a lot more easily. So I think what's happening here is that you're seeing this as a manifestation of as a larger and larger percentage of children are growing up in broken homes. This is where it's manifesting, where the girls are becoming particularly psychologically impacted by it, and they're more likely to be hostile to marriage than boys because they're looking at it from their own perspective, and again, they're more likely to be traumatized than boys are. And it doesn't really matter how we perceive trauma, right? Like, because there are a lot of things that girls will get super upset by, that boys, it'd be like, whatever, who cares? But that's just a psychological difference between the sexes, right? It's just how it is with them. But and obviously, I think there's other elements, like girls have much higher standards than they do now, than they did in the past. We could say much less realistic standards. That's another factor. But I think a driving element here that hasn't been discussed enough is the psychological perception of divorce being very likely, and how girls process that, especially as children. You know, because I know I lived around a lot of girls when I was growing up, because my neighborhood was mostly daughters instead of sons for the couples, and I've known several girls and I've seen the psychological impact of them growing up as their parents separated, and yeah, it was a major impact. Don't you get arrested for using the wrong pronouns in Canada? In theory, yes. I think it's one of those things where it's like if you get prominent enough and you make it a point, they'll make an example out of you. But I think other than that, you're probably okay. My family had a pool while growing up, and when divorce happened, there'd be days where lunch would be the only thing I eat for the day. Yeah, exactly. I didn't experience that myself when my parents separated, but it was definitely a big change because my father's business, like my mother pretty much ran all the books for it. So when that wasn't possible anymore, it had an impact on his finances. But my father was also super frugal. He was really, really conservative with his money. So it's not like we would spend a lot anyways. Now, in hindsight, I realized the wisdom behind what he was doing, but at the time it seemed like he was really stingy. Like he would never buy name brand stuff. It would always be like knockoff food, like the knockoff brands or whatever. But he was able to save a lot of money as a consequence. But yeah. Anyways, guys, I'm going to wrap it up now because it's actually, I didn't even mean to go as long as I have, but I did kind of ramble a lot. So I'm going to roll it up now since we're approaching the 3-hour mark. Thank you very much. I see a few new names in here. Very glad to have you aboard and interacting and talking about it. So anyways, guys, I'll talk to you later.